Well, it's, how you doing, sir?
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. If you guys want to grab a seat, we're going to get started here. Thank you for coming to our 2026 Winter Seminar Series at Herrington Harbour. Today kind of wraps everything up for us. Hope you guys that all have attended the seminars have enjoyed them. Please look for the surveys in the fall and let us know if there's any additional seminars you want to see for next season. Today, we're going to welcome Captain Frank Lanier. Captain Frank is a retired U.S. Coast Guard officer, SAMS accredited Marine surveyor, and a true authority in the maritime world. With over 40 years of hands-on experience across boating, seamanship, marine electronics, vessel maintenance, Captain Frank is also a respected author, public speaker, digital content creator, and award-winning marine journalist whose work has been read by boaters around the globe. Please join me in welcoming Captain Frank Lanier today. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. And so the topic we're going to be doing today is the Miller All Spring checklist. So this is just a list I've compiled of things that I would check when I had my boat, and hopefully it'll give you guys a good place to start. It's not all inclusive, but it'll give you a good foundation to build your own and tailor it to your own boat and stuff. So before we get started, I'll tell you just a little bit about myself. He probably covered most of it. Again, I'm Frank Lanier. I grew up in a place called Topsail Island, North Carolina. And from there, I did about 28 years in the Coast Guard, traveled all over the globe. I did everything from, in conjunction with and during my Coast Guard career. I operated and maintained dive boats, passenger ferries, pretty much all over the world, from the Atlantic, Caribbean, the South Pacific, Guam. I did 9 years on a sailboat. I lived on a sailboat for 9 years in Hawaii while I was stationed there with the Coast Guard. So I've got a pretty good background on all the stuff. I've been around boats in the water all my life. And this is my book. This is the author part comes in. It's just a book on curious nautical knowledge, Captain Frank's. Jack Tarn, the Baboon Watch. If you guys would like this, they're available for sale on my website and my YouTube channel. And if you mention this seminar, I'll give you 15% off of your order. I've got the book, I've got hats, sun hats, ball caps, and all that kind of stuff. So mentioning that, I have a YouTube channel, Everything Boats with Captain Frank. And up until about a year and a half ago, I had no social media presence whatsoever. I didn't Twitter, tweet, burp, fart, none of that stuff. But I've written for magazines probably the last 30 years, and I've got probably 2,000 articles. And I said, well, you know what? I'll try to get this stuff up on YouTube and get it up online where people can access and see it. So I have my articles that I do. I've got different sections on my YouTube channel. I've got the Ask Captain Frank stuff, where I just ask questions from my YouTube channel viewers, people from my marine survey business. I do own a marine survey company in Chesapeake, Virginia. So I've got people asking me questions from those two sources, or just people randomly calling me up trying to give me an answer stuff for free. So we've got the Ask Captain Frank, Talking Naughty, which is where I do my articles and stuff on topics, anything boating related. Pretty much anything is on the table, from installations, maintenance, repairs, whatever you're going to do on your boat, I've probably done and written an article about. And let's see here. I also have my 60-second surveys. That's a very popular portion of my YouTube channel, where I just go on and I find bad things on boats, do a little 60-second blurb. This is what I find. This is why it's bad. This is how what you should do to correct it. So, and okay, so I've broken this down into segments. We're going to do stuff like the hull exterior, the interior, electronics, and stuff like that. I'll show the list and we'll go through them. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. And I'll also have a question and answer period at the end of the slideshow as well. And we'll go through and I'll show the list, and then I'll show some photos. So this right here, this is a happy photo, right? This guy looks like he's happy. He's out there enjoying a nice spring day. He's probably whistling, having fun. working on the love of his life here. This morning he probably, before he headed out to the Marina, he had a nice breakfast, maybe conjugal relations with his wife. Who knows, right? But he looks happy. This is the only happy picture you'll see today. And the reason being is because as a marine surveyor, I note and try to find all the good stuff, but invariably I find the bad stuff. I mean, that's my job to see if there's anything wrong with the boat. So all of the pictures you'll see accompanying this slideshow are going to be the things you need to look out for, the bad things. Okay, so that's, as we go through, you'll see what I'm talking about. But again, as we go through, if you have any questions, feel free to ask, and it's not going to bother me at all. So let's see here. So we'll start on the, as we, just to go back, hull exterior. And we're going to start with talking about things you should look for on the hull exterior, right? You got to inspect the hull for blisters, distortion, and stress cracks. The best time to look for blisters, which we'll talk about in a moment, is right after the boat's been hauled and power washed and the hull's still wet. And I'll show you how you can look for them and how you see them. But, that's the best time because blisters themselves, they can deflate. I've seen them deflate in a number of hours, over a couple of hours. So the best time is right after you've hauled the boat and when the hull is still wet. You want to clear out your through hull fittings, intake strainers, centerboard trunks, all that stuff of marine growth or debris. Inspect each for damage, leaks, and corrosion, and the like. For your centerboard trunks, you want to check the pivot points and the control lines and all that stuff. And again, this is kind of a generic list. It covers both power, sail, small boats, large boats, whatever. And you would again tailor this to your particular needs. Make sure the bottom is clean, has a good coat of anti-fouling paint, and inspect the hull to deck joint and rub rails for damage and leaks and such. If you've got a sailboat, check your bobstays or your boomkin fittings for tightness, rust, metal fatigue, and stuff like that. Run and rust, look for that. Run and rust is just where you have corrosion, you have staining coming down the hull. Run and rust means leaks and stains. That's your boat's way of telling you something's going on, and that something's probably not very good. So anytime you see that, don't just take the Scotch pad and clean it up and call it done. You want to figure out what's going on, right? Why is it leaking? For again, centerboards, pivot pins, pennant wear replaces needed. Check your sacrificial anodes, also known as zincs, right? People call them zincs. They're not always zincs. They could be out of magnesium, aluminum, whatever, but that's a generic name for them. You want to check them, note the condition, the correct number, and the type and size and stuff. If you have sacrificial anodes that are specific to your equipment, like bow thruster zincs and stuff, now's a good time to note them and to order a couple of spares. If you go cruising and you haul out somewhere, the marina you're at may not have that particular zinc, so it's always good to have some extras. If you have a diver clean the boat and stuff, they can check it as well while you're in the water. Clean and wax the hull, gel coat, or touch up if painted. So here we get into the pictures. Blisters, right? Again, the best time to check for blisters is when you haul the boat and power wash and the hull is still wet. You can angle yourself where you get the light just right, and you can walk along the whole hull, and the blisters will pop out just like this right here. Okay. Yes, ma'am. You're gonna have to speak up, right? I'm sorry. I'm standing right here in front of you, but I can't hear you.
Dumb question, but what does that indicate to you?
Blisters. Okay. Well, blisters, they're rarely structurally significant, but they're there. They have, if you want to address them, like this right here, when you have so many blisters like this right here, it's called boat pox is what it is, right? A Cliff Notes version, a generic description of what a blister is, and I'm not trying to sidetrack here too much, but you have, when they build the whole boat, they spray the gel coat into the mold. You have a skin out mat, which is just chopped fiberglass strands impregnated with resin. You have that chopper mat or skin out mat, and then they lay the fiberglass cloth in there. The only purpose of the skin out mat is to prevent the weave of the laminate from showing through the gel coat. And if you have the gel coat is a very porous material. Water is a very small, molecule. It can go in through the gel coat. It goes into the skin out mat. If there's any voids or anything like that, the water gets in there and it starts to dissolve, the epoxy, and it creates a bigger molecule. Now that can't get back out through the gel coat because it's too big. So then it starts to build pressure, and that's a very generic description of what a blister is. If they're small, or if they're not so many as this, you can spot treat them, you grind them out, fill them in with a epoxy-based fairing material, and thickened epoxy, and then you sand them smooth, and that's pretty much it. If you have a lot of blisters like this, to address it really fully, you would probably have to plane the hull, remove the gel coat and the skin out mat, and then rebuild the hull back up. Or you just leave it like that and you go boating, right? You're really not going to know it while it's in the water. And again, they're rarely structurally significant, although I have seen some about the size of a pie plate before, right? That's where you start getting in, because normally the blister, because the laminate is stronger than the gel coat, it'll push out on the gel coat more so than the laminate. So, but again, you would evaluate what your boat has and kind of proceed from there. Does that answer your question? Okay. So this right here, this started out as an irregular bump. The guy, he had his spring haul out, and he looked, he said, well, my keel, it's got like a bulge on it. And why is that? Well, when they built that boat, they used concrete as a ballast material. Concrete's not very heavy. So they threw whatever they had laying around the yard, rust, cast iron, whatever they had to add weight to it. Well, eventually, water migrated down to it and started rusting out the cast iron stuff or steel or whatever, engine block, whatever they use, right? And that's what you get right there. Crack on a skeg for a sailboat. This is the kind of stuff you look for, when you're doing your spring check and walking around your boat. And this is just a corroded cast iron keel on a sailboat, And what they did was the coating for the cast iron, they let it go and let it go and let it go, and it eventually just started corroding. And that, in a combination with a lack of galvanic corrosion protection, the sacrificial anodes and stuff. Through hulls, cracked through hulls. This illustrates both things you'll probably find, right? And for your through hull, basically your through hull is, it's a flange with a tube on it. And you slide it into the side of your boat, the hole in the side of your boat, and you put the nut on it, you tighten it up, and everybody's happy, right? Well, eventually, due to UV damage and corrosion, let's see if I can find another thing here. Oh, it doesn't show up very well here. I got to use the pointer, right? Okay, all right. So when you check your through hulls, composite through hulls, you look for these cracks right here, right? Because, due to UV damage and degradation of the material, they can crack right here. Eventually, they'll crack to the point where they crack all the way around and the flange falls off. And what happens then? Well, then there's nothing holding the through hull in, so it'll pull in. And you may say, well, if this is up on the rub rail, that's not that big of a deal. Well, if this is like 2 inches, above the water line, now you've reduced your freeboard from, 3 foot or whatever to like 3 inches, right? And even if it's up high, if that's the discharge for your bilge pump, if that pulls in, it's just going to be recycling the water you're pumping out of your bilge, right? So you can walk in any boatyard and find these. Yes, sir.
So it's not just replacing the outer nut, it's the entire.
Yes, sir. This is as far as replacement, you basically have a tube with a flange on the outside of it. You slide the tube in, the flange is against the outside of the hull here, and then you have a nut on the back that you tighten it up, and that's what compresses and holds it in place. Yes, sir.
Why would they use some kind of composite or plastic instead of a metal fitting?
They use it cheaper, probably. And the problem is when you have these composite through hulls, you'll rarely see where there's a name or a manufacturer on them, right? First generation, second generation, third, whatever. The newer ones are a little better with regards to resistance to UV damage, but you can't look at them and tell. So that's why you have to kind of treat all of them. If all of your through hulls above the water line, of course, is what we're talking here, if they're composite and you find 1 or 2 that starts to crack, the best thing to do is start a replacement schedule to do all of them, because they're all probably the same age, right? And likely prone to similar failure as well. At a minimum, you want to check them every time you do the haul out. If you look and you don't see any cracks, take a little wooden dowel or something, stick it in and kind of put a little bit of pressure around it, to see if they crack or pop. Okay. If you're looking, again, I told you, these are all bad things, right? If you're looking at your bronze through hulls, like below the waterline here, and you see it's nice and shiny, pink colored or nice, and this is actually, you can look at it, it's a little granular looking, right? This is due to improper or not enough protection, not enough sacrificial anodes, or electrical issues that you may have on the boat or the boats around you or the dock wiring, right? A lot of times you'll see also what you've got here is called haloing. And haloing, most time you see it when you've got the black bottom paints that have a lot of copper in them. It creates its own little galvanic cell, right? So if you ever see that, that's the cause of the haloing. But this right here, the pink color, that's dezinctification of the bronze, and that's typically due to improper lack of, or lack of galvanic protection. Okay, next up, we're going to talk about steering and the running gear. And of course, here you got a hydraulic, a single ram going to a jockey bar and stuff, and this is fluid leaking out, spurting all over the side and stuff. That's the kind of stuff you look for. You want to check your gear, running gear, the props, shaft, struts, and rudder for problems such as corrosion or impact damage. Inspect your props for dings, pitting, and distortion. Your props are bronze, so you want to check and make sure that they're not pink colored as well, right? Because that also is the same thing with your through hulls, your bronze. It's dezinctification of the bronze, and you check for that. Make sure your propeller nuts and cotter pins are installed and secure. Service your feathering props per the manufacturer's instructions. You lube them, pull them, whatever they recommend. Check your cutlass bearing for wear. You want to grip the prop and try to move the shaft. If it's loose, if you can take your prop, again, this depends on the size of it. It's easy enough to do a 3/4 or 1/2 inch shaft. You wiggle it and see it. But if you've got a shaft that's like 2 inches in diameter and about 50 feet long, you got to do a little more. You got to take a take a board with a pry and kind of lift it up to see if you can move it. All right. But what you're looking for is you're trying to see if there's any movement in the cutlass bearing. And I'll show you some pictures here in just a moment about that. Sorry, I got to get my water bottle here. Seeing if I could talk while I was drinking, that would be something too, right? So, so we're looking at the cutlass bearing. Inspect your entire steering system. Ensure the rudders swing free throughout the entire steering range of motion. What you don't want is you want it to be free, as it turns the mechanism or whatever you have, but you don't want it to be loose. Like if you have a rudder that's coming out like on a sailboat, for example, if you can move it fore and aft and port to starboard, that would make you think, well, maybe something's wrong with the bearing and the rudder bearing and stuff, right? That's the kind of stuff you look for. You got to be a pessimist. You got to be a pessimist when you look at your boat, right? It's kind of a sad thing to say, but it's true. What's the benefit of being a pessimist? You only get pleasant surprises. So if you look at your boat from the eye of a pessimist, then everything's okay, then everything's good to go. Inspect your engine shaft and rudder packing glands, repack as necessary. Inspect and service dripless type glands per the manufacturer's instructions. Remove and inspect cooling water hose end. So if you have a dripless shaft seal, okay, a lot of people, they tout this, it's a dripless shaft seal, it's maintenance free. Well, nothing is truly maintenance free, right? Yes, you don't have to pack it and stuff like you do a traditional stuffing box, but even for your dripless shaft seals like your PSS, PYI glands and stuff, they recommend that you pull them and inspect them, the bellows and stuff every 6 or 7 years, I think it is. I've got an article on my YouTube channel on how to maintain and troubleshoot those things. But the thing to remember is you should pull them and inspect them about every 6, 7 years. And if you pull them, it's false economy just to stick them back on there, right? You stick a 7-year-old piece of hose back on your boat, right? The big money is getting them off because you typically have to disengage the shaft from the transmission and pull it all back. So if you pull that rubber stuff, you can replace all the rubber for like $300 or $400. That's the smart way to go. That way you don't have to worry about it for another 7 years, right? And I say remove and inspect cooling water hoses. If some of the seals for higher RPM boats will have a hose plumbed to them. Cooling water from your engine typically that just forces water in there so that it can run at a higher prems and it doesn't overheat. If you've got that hose, I would at least unhook it and blow it out to make sure there's nothing growing in there or anything, right? And check your shaft coupling for play or loose hardware. Okay, so you can see we got a problem here, right? A little bit of reduction in shaft diameter. You know, this is again due to galvanic corrosion. And again, this is the kind of stuff you look for, right? So here's a quiz for you. The prop nut controversy, right? And I'll give you a little lead in on this. Okay, you've got thin nut, thin nut, or you have jam nut and jammed nut, you know, which is the correct way. And I will tell you, but I'll just the front end load you on this. I used to carry, professional boat builder did a spread on this probably 20 years ago, and it had a big picture of the prop and it had the nut controversy, right? So when I go there to the marinas and stuff, and I tell these guys, right, the proper way to do this is you would think, well, I just, I'll back this big nut there and I'll crank it down. That gets everything set up. And then I just put this little nut on the back of it, just to tighten things up, keep it from backing up. Well, that's not true. That's not correct. What you want to do is you put the thin or jammed nut first and you tighten it down. Okay, that gets everything tightened up. When you tighten this bigger nut, right, the nut on the back, when you tighten that against this front nut, that takes the load. That takes the load of everything, right? And if it's going to take the load, you want it to have the most surface area, thread area, right? So you would snug that down and then you tighten it up with the large nut, the jam nut. And that's technically the proper way to do it. Is it critical? No, because if it was, half the boats around here wouldn't have any props on them. But I used to get in you go to the yard, right, and you talk to them and well, we've been doing it that way for 40 years. Well, buddy, you've been doing it wrong for 40 years, but who am I to say, right? But technically, this is the accurate way to do it, okay? So, contentious subject, right? Your cutlass bearing may be worn when you have a visible gap in here, right? And also what happens is your cutlass bearing, and I'll show you another picture here. Your cutlass bearing is basically a rubber tube, and it has grooves running fore and aft, right? The purpose of these grooves that run fore and aft of it is to let water in there to cool the shaft while it's turning. Eventually, the rubber starts to wear, the grooves start to wear away. And what happens is now your shaft is resting on like a flat surface with no grooves, no water underneath it, and it'll eventually start scoring the shaft. It'll get hot enough that it'll start scoring the shaft and reducing the diameter of the shaft. And that's what you have when you get here, right? Check and make sure you have all your blades on your prop. That's another good thing too, right? This guy, had a bad day on the water.
So, in that picture, where does the sacrificial anode go? If there isn't room on that back end of.
Okay, so in this particular picture, for your sacrificial anodes, your galvanic corrosion protection, you're going to have a couple of different ways. It may be on your boat. Some boats will have like an acorn nut on the prop. Some of them you'll put them on the shaft up here. Some of them may even have a transom plate that has wiring going to a brush that rides on the shaft inside the boat, right? It rides on the boat. So it just depends on how the boat's configured and the prop's configured, right? Or how they're configured by the manufacturer.
So you mentioned before on the through holes, the metal through holes, that one where it would work with pink, and you said it's, the anode's not doing its job. Where would the anode be for that?
Well, you mean for the through hole?
For the through hole.
It doesn't have to be on the through. I mean, for galvanic corrosion to occur, right? It doesn't have to be. There's not necessarily any sacrificial anodes attached to that, right? You're protecting the boat as a whole. And that's where you get into, another contentious topic, whether do you bond all of your through holes together or whether you keep them separate, okay? And again, if you ask 5 surveyors, you'll get 10 different answers, right? What I'll say is that I'm not a big fan of bonding through holes and everything to each other and to the whatever you're protecting it from, because if you keep them isolated, it has less chance of having a wire, yes, a bonding wire going to it. I'm not a big fan of it, but people do it and stuff. I will say that if you do have a bonding system, then you need to keep it where it's in good shape. No corrosion on the wires, connections and stuff like that. If you have a bonding system and it's corroded, it's even worse than any of it not or having it or whatever, right? So you want to make sure that you keep it in good condition so there's no, corrosion and stuff on it to prevent, the bonding from actually working.
So can I follow that up with, our sailboat has a steel keel, or a iron. Should we, I've been told we should think about putting some anodes on it, like bolting them to the keel.
It has a cast iron keel.
Yeah,
Okay.
should we be thinking about that, or is it okay?
How old is it?
How old is it?
How old's the boat?
2008.
8. Or do you have any issues with it now?
We get rust on it.
That's typically the rust and stuff could be from the coating failures and stuff. There's nothing wrong, I would consult what the manufacturer of the boat recommends, right? If it's, 20 years old or whatever, 8, 20, 15, whatever. My math's not good on the fly. If you haven't had any problems with it now, I would just monitor it every time you haul and see if you have any issues. There probably is nothing wrong with, adding some zinc here and there, but if it's that old and you haven't had any issues, I wouldn't worry about it.
Just rust.
Just rust, yeah. Yeah. Again, coating is key for the cast iron, keels below, if you don't have the coating maintained properly, then it's going to corrode.
So would you use epoxy paint then for that coating?
For the cast iron
Yes.
keel, I would, again, the go-to would be what the manufacturer recommends. But
Cast iron.
right, so whatever they recommend, but you can prime it, etch it, prime it, clear or coat it, and then go from there and then paint over it, and it should be fine. So, the key is that you don't want the, you don't want it exposed, of course, to, salt water or whatever water you're in and stuff. So again, if you prep it, prime it, paint it properly, then it should be fine. As far as specific products, I don't know what specific ones you would use, but, whatever the manufacturer recommends, yeah. So let's talk a little, out drives. Talk a little bit about out drives. I will say that I'm prejudiced against out drives, stern drives. Probably if you're going to keep the boat in the water, this is the worst thing to try to maintain if the boat is continually in the water. If it's on a lift, dry stores, that's a whole different animal, right? But if you have a aluminum stern drives and out drives, and you're in the water, this is what you got to contend with, right? Keeping it like this. And plus, if you're in the water, if there's any boats around you that have any, electrical issues, wiring issues, if the dock is around you, then your, out drive or stern drive, that's the big sacrificial anode everybody's going to be pulling from, right? So you may, every time you move to a new slip or a dock, you always want to check the rate of wear on your zincs. This is for any boat. For your sacrificial anodes, how fast are they burning off? If they're burning off faster than normal, then that probably indicates, and you haven't had that problem, there's a boat around you that may have wiring issues, or the dock may have wiring issues. So anyway, walk away point here, stern drive owners are giving people, they give of themselves to everybody around them. Yeah. You want to service your out drives per your manufacturer's recommendations. Check the out drive for wear and tear, corrosion, or impact damage. Check power steering and power trim oil levels. Inspect the stern drive grommets and bellows for splits or deteriorated spots, paying close attention to the bellows folds. And inspect your outer jacket, your control cables for cracks, swelling, indication of corrosion that mean the cable has to be replaced. One of the magazines I write for that you may know, Boat US Magazine, I do a ton of stuff for them. In fact, if you look at the last issue here, the most recent one, I think I've got like 5 articles in there. And it's all about maintenance, repair, and all that stuff. And I just recently did an article on control cable and steering and stuff too. So anyway, just it's there, or will be. So this is what happened to your stern drive if you don't maintain the, the galvanic protection on it, right? And this is a funny story, right? I had a lot of funny stories. I could tell funny stories all day. So this guy, when I inspected it, I actually was an insurance survey, and I showed it to him. This thing, it had holes in it. You could stick your fist in almost, right? And I did it for an insurance claim. And the guys had claimed it and said that this happened over a period of like a week and a half, right? And, you know, I'm not there to judge, right? I just write facts down, you know. And so he said, well, I hit one of them logs and it broke the grounding wire on it. And I left it for a week and a half in the water, and this is what I come back to. And I said, okay. He said, what do you think? I said, well, you know, it looks to me like it's lack of galvanic protection. Oh, it can't be that. I said, well, why not? Because I ain't covered for that. So it can't be that, but that's certainly what it was. The bellows, right? When you're looking at the bellows, you have to extend those things where you can see in between the grooves. That's where a lot of your problems will be found, right?
So, the stupid question.
Yes, sir.
Bellows, is that just carrying the exhaust out?
For that particular one is an exhaust, yeah. But the thing is, they're below the water line. A lot of them are, or partially are below the water line. So they can let water back into the boat or to your engine, right? Catastrophic results. So talking about the deck, right? This is a boat I used to do when I lived in Hawaii. I came back to the Virginia. Why did I come to Virginia? Because that's the closest I could find to get near my home. I bought this boat, restored it up, soloed it down to the Bahamas, stayed there, knocked around for about a year. Then I came back and started working again, right? So sorry?
Sorry, it's a tough life.
It's a tough life, it is, right? So inspect your exterior woodwork, varnish, oil, and stuff like that, whatever you decide to do. I used to write for a magazine called Practical Sailor. You guys may have heard of that, Practical Sailor. I wrote for them for about 30 years. And the benefit of having that boat right there is it was so maintenance intensive, you could test any product that they wanted to test, right? Whether it was teak, oil, bungs. I redid the deck on that thing, tinted it and just, hands and knees for about a month and a half, taking out caulking seams and recalking and rebunging all stuff. Man. Anyway, it was a very good platform to test all kind of stuff. If you have inspector non-skid, ensure it still provides good traction. Teak decks clean, inspect for damage. You have missing bungs, loose boards, whatever, failed caulking seams. I can tell you everything you want to know about teak decks. Yes, sir.
On the non-skid, as your boat gets older, obviously that stuff starts wearing. How do you address that?
Okay, there's a number of ways you could do it, and it depends on how you want to address it. If it's molded, I'm assuming you're talking about molded in non-skid. Yeah. Probably. And I'm sorry.
And it's not painted.
It's not painted. Yeah. Probably the only thing you're going to be able to do with that is to apply non-skid to it. If it's just like glass right there, all of the tread wears away, right? You're either going to have to apply non-skid to it, either in the form of paint, grit, whatever, or you may put tread mats and stuff like that. It just depends, all right? For your non-skid, you can apply, coatings anywhere from, I used on the first time I did that when I used crushed walnut shells, right? You're not going anywhere with that. The disadvantage of it is, even though you're not slipping, if you kneel on it, you leave a little meat from your knees, right? So you got to find, everything's got trade-offs. The more aggressive stuff you use, the harder it is on your knees and stuff. So you got to find a happy medium. Whether you use paints, some paints have the micro balloons in them. You stir it up and paint them on. They're like little, rust. Some of the paints will have use a special roller with a nap on it that generates the ridges and stuff. There's tons of ways. If you want me to, if you shoot me an email, I'll send you an article or two I've written on that, right? Okay, clean wax, polish your stainless steel and all that stuff. Inspect all your cleats, fair leads, chocks, etc. Check the tightness of each by tapping them with a rubber mallet. As part of my marine survey, when I go and inspect the boats, and I got a big old rubber mallet, I'll go around and tap all your cleats. You'd be amazed what you see. Everything from loose cleats to water spurting out of them, right? Check all your dock lines for chafe. Make sure that you have adequate fenders and a boat hook on board. Fenders, you'll never hear anybody complain that they have fenders that are too big, right? That you always want to have large fenders on board, particularly if you find yourself docking up or mooring against a concrete bulkhead or wall or whatever, right? Or even if you're rafting up with somebody, right? Inflatable fenders are good for this. I've did a couple of articles on different types of inflatable fenders. They're good. You can blow them up, and then you can, take them down and stow them easier when you uninflate them. Inspect your lifelines for failed hardware and rust. Vinyl-coated lifelines are difficult to inspect and should be replaced at the first signs of rust. Check the stanchions for problems such as loose mounting and broken hardware. I will say, for sailboats, vinyl-coated lifelines, it's probably the worst thing you can use. Why is that, right? Well, if you have a vinyl coating, that vinyl coating can weaken moisture underneath them. You can't check them as easy. Let me see. I think the next. Well, I'll show you some pictures here in a second of them. But you get moisture trapped in there, and it starts to generate corrosion that you can't really tell. There may be some outer signs, but the best thing to use for your lifelines is uncoated wire, bare wire. Okay. And the reason people like the vinyl coated stuff because it looks nice, it's easier on your hands, but it can certainly prevent you from inspecting them properly, right? And you have the added benefit if you go to bare wire, you can increase the size of the wire because it'll to match the outside diameter of the wire plus the vinyl coating, right? Let's see here. Inspect all your ground tackle. Check anchors for damage, bent flukes, damaged shanks, etc. Seize all your screw pin shackles. Renew anchor road markings as needed and ensure bitter end is secured to the vessel. Two things I always look for when I do inspections of anchor road. Your screw pin shackles, right? That's your shackles has that little screw pin that goes in there. You tighten it down. You should run a little bit of mousing wire or stainless steel wire through that eye hole on your shackle. That's what it's for. And around the body of the shackle, just do a couple of turns and tuck it up neatly. That prevents the shackle from unscrewing while you're anchored, okay? And if you're gonna have connections to your anchor, you got, combination roads or all chain road where they connect to your anchor or the connections between your chain section and your rope road, make sure you use the proper shackles and stuff. Don't use any of the quick links or any of that stuff like that. They're just not as strong. Yes, sir.
When you're talking about putting the wire through the pin to tie to make sure it doesn't come, a lot of people are using zip ties.
You can use zip ties. The only thing with zip ties, you just have to check them because they may fall off. All you're doing is preventing the screw pin from backing out. You can use zip ties, but it just adds you another thing that you got to look and see if they have UV damage or whatever, because your anchor sets up on the bow all the time. And so nothing wrong with that either. Inspect your anchor rollers, related deck hardware, cleats, Samson posts, whatever. Inspect and test your windlass. Conduct routine maintenance per the manufacturer's instructions. Inspect, clean, and treat all of your canvas work, both installed and in storage, right? If you have canvas work for your boat, if you know that it tends to shrink a little bit if you don't install it every once in a while. So at least once a year, if you want it to maintain, take it out and make sure it all still fits, right? As a general rule, all deck hardware should be pulled and rebedded every 8 to 10 years, sooner if leaks or other issues are noted. Deck hardware would be stuff like cleats, stanchions, lifeline stanchions. After about 8 to 10 years, caulking doesn't owe you anything, right? So it's a good idea from a preventative maintenance standpoint. Just start a schedule of going around and pulling them. You pull them, that allows you to inspect the hardware. You check the deck, make sure there's no moisture intrusion into it, and then you rebed it, renew the caulking. You don't have to do it all at once. Go down there one weekend, get your coffee made, and okay, I'm going to do the port one right there. Pull one at a time. You don't have to do it all the time. It's an ongoing maintenance thing, right? But it will benefit you in the long run because if you get moisture into your decks and it's cord construction, then you have rot, delamination, whatever, depending on what the material is they use for the cord. Even if they, typically they're going to use for your cord, for cord construction, just I'm going to give you a little brief thing so you know what I'm talking about. Cord construction just means something sandwiched between two layers of fiberglass. It could be ingrained balsa, it could be plywood, it could be foam, whatever they use, or whatever they use. It's just something in between two layers of fiberglass. The reason they build, decks and stuff of cord construction is because they say, well, a 1/2-inch panel of cord construction is stronger than a 1/2-inch thick piece of fiberglass, which is, is probably due to the I-beam effect. That's probably true. The real reason to do it because it's cheaper to build. And anytime you have a penetration through the chord portions of your boat, whether it's a bolt for a stanchion or a cleat, whatever, it has to be properly decored and maintained, to prevent moisture from going inside. The rest of it, if it has a leak or whatever. Yes. Oh, we got a lot of them.
What about
Yes, sir. I'll start with you.
Back to anchors, are you an advocate of getting rid of swivels?
Swivels, I have no problem with swivels, as long as there's certain types that I will, drop forged and single swivels are good. A lot of people look at an anchor swivel and say, well, you're introducing another link into the system, that may or may not fail. As long as you buy from a reputable, manufacturer and they're good quality, I wouldn't buy anything off Amazon and stuff, right? But if you get a good reputable one, I think Mantis or what's the other ones, guys? Quick or what? There's a number of them that are pretty reputable. Get them a lot more than what your system would require, and you'll be fine, right? Yes, sir.
what about things like spider cracks in the gel coat? How critical are those?
Spider cracks in gel coat, you're talking about like around something mounted, like a cleat or a stanchion or something? Well, what I would do is if I had, if you have cracks emanating from a cleat or whatever, first thing I would do is just, I would pull the cleat and see if you can see the coring material and make sure that it's still in good condition and not, wet, or there's no moisture in there that could reduce the structural integrity. 90% of your little cracks like that are going to be cosmetic. But you don't know that until you pull it and check it and see, right? Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
What about marking the anchor chain with zip ties? Do they get caught in the windlass?
I'm sorry?
Do you usually paint the anchor chain?
You paint the anchor chain?
Well, no, just like mark 20 feet, every 20 feet.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you're talking about marking the roads of it. You can paint it. The only thing I don't like about painting it is if it's muddy, you can't really see it very well, right? If it gets mud on it. Zip ties are fine. I mean, I used to have, you can search online and you'll have a plethora of people have their different ways they all like to mount their anchor. I use, zip ties. I use a one blue for this and blue and a red, white and blue for, that's all kinds of, as long as you use something that you're familiar with and you know what it is, then it's fine. And zip ties on your anchor chain is not going to affect it going through your windlass. And just a quick nautical trivia here. You know what that piece of your windlass where your chain goes through, you know what that's called? It's called a wildcat. Because if it gets hold of you, it feels like a wildcat's got hold of you, right? That's why they call it a wildcat. Yeah, it's a wildcat. Okay, so this is the kind of stuff you look for. This, this of course can, this chalk, this lead here can damage your line as it saws through and stuff over it. Your vinyl coated lifelines. This is the kind of things you have to watch out. Once the vinyl coating starts to split, it lets moisture in, and then that wicks it around and creates all kind of mayhem. Look at your stanchions, your bow, your railings and stuff. Look at the, the mounts and stuff. See any breaks, broken welds, anything like that. Yeah, that's an actual picture. It wasn't staged. If you have a chain ball of rust, you're likely not going to be, well, the benefit of that is you probably don't have to worry about losing your anchor. The other disadvantage, though, if it's like this, you're not going to be able to get all of your length of your anchor road and stuff. And I'll say that if you have an all-chain road or any road, your anchor road, you want it to be attached to your boat, the bitter end, the end of it. You want it to be attached to the boat, right? And why is that? Well, it's not there to, it doesn't take the structural load, the load of the anchor, and it's just to prevent you from accidentally losing it. That's why they call it the bitter end, because you're mighty bitter when you see it going over, right? So you always want to have your road attached, the bitter end attached to your boat. And again, it's not meant to bear the load of anchoring. And if you have an all-chain road, you can use a length of small stuff line. Make sure you have a long enough line that it'll come up to the deck, and you could cut it and splice in a buoy or something if you needed to buoy your anchor or whatever. Yes, sir.
So I worked on the anchor this winter. It's a galvanized steel anchor, but it had a stainless steel pin through the shank, just to hold the blade, the speed and the shank.
Mm-hmm.
Replace that, but what do you recommend, what product do you recommend just to avoid the corrosion of two different metals?
You mean as far as there any galvanic reaction between the two or whatever?
Just to protect the steel and aluminum replacing there.
Teflon, food grade silicone, anything to keep it lubed and separated like that, right? Again, it's going to kind of depend on how, what you got there, but if you keep it lubed and keep it isolated from it, it's just like stainless steel screws and aluminum mast, right? Kind of the same thing. You got to keep it isolated the best you can. And even when you do all that, I would probably pull it on a regular basis, inspect it, and lube it again, right? So it doesn't freeze up in there, right? Easier to do that than try to get it out after it's locked up, right? And again, if you guys have any questions, even on this, but anytime after, if you've got any other questions, feel free to shoot me an email. If you go on my YouTube channel, I got probably 800 videos on there or close to it, and covers everything you can think about on boats. But if you have specific questions, you don't see it, just shoot me an email. My email address, I'll give it to you. You'll always have somebody you can ping on if you've got a question, right? And that's kind of the way with my surveys. I sell myself into servitude with every survey. What I mean by that, you call me next week or 10 years from now, right? As long as I'm on this earthly plane, I'll answer the phone. I may even answer if I'm not. But you've always got somebody to ping on. And if you need an opinion, man, I got 1,000,000 of them. I don't mind giving them out. So don't hesitate. If you got a question, shoot me an email. Okay. Bent shank there on the anchor. This is the kind of stuff you look for, right? Of course, that happened where the anchor hung up and he tried to circle around it, or he got too close to it and tried to jam it up and stuff. Okay, rigging. So now we're going to talk a little about sailboat rigging and stuff. I probably survey more sailboats than anybody in my region. I survey, in the vernacular of the common man, I survey a crap load of sailboats. And I survey a lot of older boats, not by design, but I just have a lot of people, call me up for sailboats. I've owned every boat that I've owned. The only way I've been able to own it is it was tore to pieces and I had to rebuild it, right? It's the only way I could afford it. So I'm pretty familiar with boats in general, but sailboats, a lot of them. For your sailboats, inspect your each wire, your shroud stays, etc., for corrosion, broken strands, fish hooks, flat spots, and the like. Tune your rigging as required. Inspect all your terminals. Remove any tape and check for corrosion or deformation. Clean the fittings with bronze wool or a Teflon pad and use a magnifying glass to check for cracks, particularly with swaged fittings, which we'll talk about here in a moment. Inspect your turnbuckles for bends or corrosion. Clean and lubricate each and ensure all have cotter pins installed. And we'll mention these a little bit more in the pictures that I have here. Check all your running rigging, halyards, furler lines for wear or chafe, particularly around belay points, and examine all fasteners and hardware attached to the mast for corrosion, damage, etc. Check your goosenecks, tangs, fittings. Inspect your mast step, particularly those keel step mast steps, because they spend a lot of time in the bilge, the corrosive, wet environment of the bilge. So you want to check those as well too. Free all of your drain holes to provide proper drainage. For your spreader boots, you want to pull them and inspect them. The best way to inspect your rig and your standing rig is I just did an article for Boat US Magazine on this too. So if you get Boat US Magazine, you'll see that as well on how to inspect your standing rig and then your chain plates and all that stuff. Inspect your chain plates for leaks. Pull and inspect and rebed every 5 years. That's I would say about 10 years. The guy that wrote this, I don't know what he was thinking about, but that'd be me. So about 8 to 10 years, kind of the same way with your deck rigging, your deck fittings and stuff. I'd say 10 years. The reason I say 10 years is because 10 years is the typical expected service life for your standing rigging. About 10 years. Some people get more. It'll be less if you're in a place like in the tropics and you sail the boat hard and stuff. But a rough guess, industry guess is about 10 years. If you have standing rigging and you don't replace it after 10 years, and at a minimum, you should have it inspected by a rigger once a year, particularly if you're going to be going offshore doing any kind of stuff like that. Right? Again, these are generic timeframes and stuff, but they're pretty accurate. Lubricate all your blocks, mast sheaves, disassemble, clean, and service all winches. And I'd recommend probably don't clean your when you disassemble your winches, don't do it in the cockpit over the rail because things tend to spring out, right? And just go overboard. Put them in a bucket where you do it in the cockpit or whatever. Inspect all your roller furlers and ensure proper operation.
How often do you rebuild your winches?
I'm sorry?
How often do you rebuild?
Yeah, you know, the real indicator is going to be, you know, how if they get stiff or whatever, right? Yeah, probably wouldn't hurt again, I'll say my standard refer to the manufacturer, but you know, probably every 5-6 years, depending on use and stuff, right? Some people get more, some people get less, right? Just do it. If you're even doing it, even for those periods, right? You're ahead of the game, right? So pull and inspect and rebid all your chain plates as required, at least 8 to 10 years. Again, that coincides with, you know, your rigging and stuff, right? Sails should be removed, cleaned, and inspected for damage. Do this in the spring or in the fall, right? If you pull your sails, take them to the sail off in the fall. That way they've got all winter to do them, right? You're not at the spring rush where everybody's waiting at the last minute to take stuff in and get them done. Check your reef points, operation of reefing systems. If you have a reefing system, you've got reefs in your mainsail. When's the last time you actually checked to make sure they work and you know how, you remember how to do them, right? So we'll talk a little bit about bad things. You know, seems like I always gyrate to the bad stuff, right? Swaged fittings. This is a typical swaged fitting. The problem with swaged fittings, they're reliable when they're done correctly and they're maintained properly. They're, you know, very common, very reliable. In this particular case, you know, water, moisture, and gunk and stuff goes down into the swedge because this is, you know, down below, and it gets in there and it starts corrosion. That's what this crack is. It's cracked due to corrosion. As stuff starts to rust and corrode, it expands, and that's what's doing that. Even worse, if anything could be worse, is something like this right here. This is a mechanical failure. In other words, this is something working back and forth. This horizontal cracking, even worse. You know, both of these should be taken care of immediately. But something like this right here, even more immediate than immediate, right? You know, tiptoe off the boat and have somebody look at it before it falls, right? Chain plates, you know, for one thing, don't paint your chain plates, right? Because you can't inspect them. Run and rust, remember we were talking about the run and rust coming through there? You know, again, the leaks and stains, that's a rare boat tells you something's going on, right? It needs to be looked at. The thing about chain plates is they can look beautiful below, they can look beautiful above the deck. That part where they transition the deck, that cord portion of your deck, that's where the bad stuff happens. Stainless steel is stainless as long as it has water around it. It's an oxygenated environment. In that deck there, that cord panel, when you're going through it, you have, if you get water in there, it's an anaerobic environment. There's no oxygen. The oxygen is what enables the stainless steel to generate the coating that protects itself. If it's in that, you know, lack of oxygen type environment, that's where it's going to corrode. So it can look great up top, it can look great down below, but that's why you got to pull them, because that transition point is where 95% of your problems would occur. And another indication, you may have leaks coming from your chain plate, you know, the bulkhead, you know, rot and stuff like that, all this around there, evidence that, you know, your chain plates may be leaking. So from a surveyor perspective and from an owner perspective, the worst type of chain plates are the ones that are glassed into the hull, right? If they're glassed into the hull, there's certain models of boats that do that. They glass them into the hull and call it good, right? There's no way to inspect them. You can't pull them, you can't inspect them. And if they get any water in there, this is what happens. They just kind of start corroding in silence away from your, you know, your view, right? And that's what happens. So your chain plates, you should always be able to access them and inspect them. Cotter pins. When you do your cotter pin, you know, you should do it around 30 degrees separation, 30, 40 degree, you know, maybe 60. Spreads it out. That's plenty enough to prevent it from falling out. Like this thing would probably fall out. What you don't want to do, don't do the ram's horn thing, right? Where they curl them all the way back around here, you know. It just makes it a pain in the butt to get off. And it really, if you had to get it off in the event of an emergency, you know, it's hard to do. You split these about 30 degrees, 40 degrees, something like that, you'll be fine. They won't fall off or fall out. Bilges. Okay, so now we're going to talk about what you look for in your bilges, right? This stuff that you see right here, it's called slurry. It's oily laden water, dirt, grime, gunk, slurry. And it's just as nasty as it looks. Clog up your bilge pump, stop your floats from working, stuff like that. Make a diagram of all your through holes, particularly those below the water line. Inspect all your hoses and ensure each are double clamped where possible. And I have this little blurb here. You double clamp them if it's possible. And what that means is if you have sufficient hose barb to allow it. You don't just arbitrarily put 2 hose clamps on there if you don't have enough barb, because if you do, it could cut into the hose. When you tighten that second one, it cut into the hose, and that's a bad installation, okay? So as it says right here, you know, hose end overlap to allow, no clamp should be installed closer than 1/4 inch to the end of the hose and must fully engage the barb or fitting to prevent cutting into the hose or forcing the hose to be cut internally by the fitting. If you have a situation on something where you need double hose clamps and you don't have sufficient hose barb is just the piece where your hose slides onto, right? You should do one of 2 things. Either you can replace that hose barb fitting where you got enough room to put 2, or just put 1 really good hose clamp, you know, good quality, beefy, robust hose clamp, okay? I've got an article on hose clamps and stuff, you know, it's hot stuff, right? But I did an article on that. If you want it, just shoot me an email and I'll send it to you on the best types of hose clamps as far as smooth bore on the inside versus the ones that have the screw holes cut out of them and stuff. Everything's pros and cons, right? Trade-offs. Let's see what else we got here. Inspect all your seacocks for proper operation. Service stiff or inoperable valves. Seacock should be exercised at least monthly. Exercise just means you open and close it, right? In a perfect world, you guys would have a diagram of your boat, all of your through-hole penetrations below the waterline, in addition to all the other stuff you would have, like where's the fire extinguishers and this and that and this and that, right? But you want a diagram because unless you've hit something and you start taking on water, chances are it's going to probably be one of these through-hole fittings that's let go, or you know, your shaft gland or something like that, right? Unless you've hit something. So these are the places you would start looking to see, right? Yes, sir.
So if the seacocks are stiff, I mean, can you lubricate them?
Yeah, some of them you can. Some of them will have Zerk. And again, this is, you know, it depends on the type you have. If you have composite versus bronze versus whatever, right? Some of the bronze will have a Zerk fitting. You can go there and stick them on there. If you don't have, and you want to lubricate it, you know, if you want to, you can pull them and disassemble when you're hauled, of course, right? And you can lube them up, disassemble them, take them apart. If you're on the hard and you don't want to, you know, you can also pull the hose off of it and get you a stick with some grease on it, you know, and exercise the seacock. Put that gob of grease down there and, you know, whatever lubricant, you know, you're supposed to use for it, whatever the manufacturer recommends, because it's different, whether it's composite, you know, the Marlon or whatever, right? But you can lose it that way. You can also come on the outside of the boat with your stick with a gob of grease on it and stick it up in there to the ball, and then have somebody inside open and close it too, right? If it's just the ball and stuff. But if you, the worst case scenario, you can pull this thing, you know, pull them when you're hauled and disassemble them and lube them and stuff. This is the one thing, you know, I call the seacocks, they're the Rodney Dangerfield of boat stuff. Anyway, if you remember, I'm dating myself, I'm sure. Rodney Dangerfield, right? Didn't get no respect, right? Nobody really thinks about their build, you know, their seacocks and stuff unless they fail, right? So you should always know where they're at, and you should exercise them to make sure they operate properly. Test all your bilge pumps, check the mounting for all pumps and float switches, clean strainers, inspect your wire connections, ensure you can power up all of your electric bilge pumps manually in addition to your float switches. If you have a bilge pump that's got an automatic float on of some type, you should have a manual on switch as well. And the reason being is that way, if the float switch fails, you can still turn your pump on, right? I'll also go out and say that you should also have a high water bilge alarm, right? And you want a high water bilge alarm, and you want one loud enough, not the little wimpy buzzer like at the helm, you know, it sounds like ignition key. You want one that's loud, one that'll just, you know, elevate yourself to code brown when it comes on. It's so loud, right? Because you want yourself to be able to hear it over engine noise while you're underway, but you also want people around the docks to hear it if something goes wrong, right? You want it loud enough everybody can hear it. Yes, sir.
How do you bypass a float switch with a manual?
You look at the wiring diagram for your bilge pumps. Most all of them will have where you can configure where you can either supply power directly to the pump or through a float switch. It's a ground is what's on that. But yeah, if you look at the diagram, I would guarantee you there's a diagram that tells you how to put a manual and an automatic. Okay. Verify operate. Well, there's the high water alarm. Verify operation of high water bilge alarms installed. If you don't have one, thoroughly clean the bilge. Ensure all of your limber holes are cleared. Dispose of the waste and oily water properly. Limber holes are just the holes along the keel that lets water flow from one end of the boat to the other, right? Check your keel bolts and other such, through hole fasteners, grounding planes, all that stuff. Clear all of your deck and scupper drains of debris. Check your hoses for splits, cracks, and make sure that they're all properly clamped or double clamped if possible. Simple thing here, there's your bilge pump. The guy, it's failed due to corrosion and split the little pump there. That's, that's the kind of things you got to look for, right? When you test your bilge pump systems, don't just turn on your pump and hear motor noise, right? You want to make sure it actually pumps water overboard, right? So here we have, we'll talk a little bit about this. You've got typically you have two pumps. Oh, let me back up. You'll have a smaller pump, which if you've got a backup pump, you have typically a smaller pump which handles the nuisance water, rainwater, stuff like that. The reason you would normally have a small pump for that and then a larger one for the backup is because the smaller pump, it's going to come on more often. It's going to be pumping stuff, less power drain, okay? If you have a backup bilge pump, you want to have that backup bilge pump mounted about 2 inches or so above the primary bilge pump. And why is that? Because this backup bilge pump is not going to be running very often, right? Only when you have flood water or only when you have water that exceeds what the primary can do. And if it's sitting in if it's at the same level, it's going to be sitting in bilge water all the time, but it's not going to be operating. So it could seize up water from lack of use. So that's why you always want to have your pump, your backup bilge pump, elevated about 1 inch or 2 above the normal accumulation of bilge water, along with your float for that as well, right? And if you're putting in an alarm, that backup pump right there is a good place to tie in to put your alarm, a sensor for your alarm, right? If the backup pump comes on, your alarm sounds. It's also a good idea to have pump on indicators at your helm, which all helm positions. In other words, if any of these pumps come on, a little LED light comes on, right? What's the benefit of that? It gives you a little more time. If there's a flooding situation, you see that pump come on and you know, hey, this thing's staying on. It doesn't normally only stays on for about 15 seconds. Now it's been on for 2 minutes. Something's going on. It'll alert you even maybe before your high water bilge alarm does. Seacock maintenance, as we talked about, if it looks like that right there, you probably need to do something because you're not going to be able to operate it. And the hose is looking kind of ratty too, right? Hose, like everything else, has got a limited lifespan. There's no hard and fast, but about 10 years of age, you want to start replacing the hoses no matter how they look, right? And this is especially true for through holes below the waterline, but it's any hose on your boat, engine, cooling, fuel, whatever. About 10 years is about when you want to start replacing them. If you're not going to use that through hole and seacock, don't just cut the hose and close the valve and call it good, right? That thing was open up, flood the boat. So what you do is, if you're not going to use this, if you're not going to use your through hull, you're never going to use the through hull, the best situation is to remove it and glass over it, when you have the boat hauled. Aside from that, unscrew this and put a bronze cap in this bronze, seacock and be done with it, right? That way it's secured, right? And I'll also say, if you have to replace a seacock for some reason, it's probably best to replace the through hull as well. That way you don't have any problems with thread mismatch and stuff, right? That hose is past its service life, right? This is a cockpit drain hose, right? It's back in the back. Nobody ever goes back there. The water goes away in my cockpit, everything's fine, right? Well, yeah, because it's draining in the bilge. Right? So that's why my bilge pump keeps coming on, yeah. Interior, you're gonna look for leaks and stains, right? This stuff right here is what I call trawler juice, right? There used to be a lot of trawlers built in the Far East, and they had, cord decks, and they had teak decks, and they had cord decks, and all those bungs, you got a nice deck with no holes in it, and you put like 1 million screws through it, and the caulking fails, it starts leaking. This is the evidence that your coring is deteriorating. So if you have this brownish gunk, well, that's what that is. Inspect your hatches and port lights for leaks, damaged components, and proper operation. Check all your gaskets, seals, replace as needed. If you've got an open cockpit type boat, like a small fishing boat or a center console, those deck plates you've got in the back where your engine wheel is, pull them and clean the gaskets and stuff on them. Try to keep water from getting them. Verify operation of your stove. Check your hoses and storage tanks for leaks, chafe, etc. For your propane system. Ensure federally required oil and garbage discharge placards are in place. In other words, Coast Guard's going to ask you if they stop you, do you have an oily waste discharge, no oily waste discharge placard? And then they'll probably ask you, do you have a trash placard or a MARPOL placard? I know because I used to do it. And they're going to ask you those two things. And if you have that on board and you pump oil overboard, you're going to say, look, that sign right there that you guys said you shouldn't do that, right? So they'll give you a ticket. And if you don't have that placard on board, they're going to say you should have that placard and they'll give you a ticket for that too. So always have them on there. Clean your cushions, covers, and carpets. Clean the bulkheads, overheads of mildew. Make sure all drawers and cabinet hardware, your latches, hinges, etc., are in working properly. So evidence of a leak here, right? Staining deterioration, wood deterioration. That's evidence that your portholes are leaking or something's leaking, right? So everybody's got funny stories, right? Man, I got a million of them. So I inspected a boat, and this is the back fitting of a propane system to the stove, right? This is where it goes to the stove. And he's got a rope holding it up. And I asked the guy, boat owners are the most creative people you can imagine. And I know I'm one of them. But I said, what's the rope for? He said, well, I noticed when I was using my stove, I started smelling that propane and, buddy, that ain't good. But I found out if I tied this fitting up like that and put pressure on one side, it stopped the leak. I said, do tell. So that's why that piece of rope is on there, right? Your hose fittings and stuff, you never want to use hose clamps. It's got to be swaged or manufactured fittings for your propane system, right? I'll tell you something else too. For your propane systems, if you have multiple appliances, right? If you've got a stove, and then you got a heater or whatever, per ABYC, which is American Boat and Yacht Council, that's who standards I survey to, you should have a dedicated line going from your propane locker to each appliance. You don't want to have a line coming out and then a T going to one, then to the other, or valves or whatever. A lot of the French boats have that on there. The reason is ABYC is trying to prevent places where you could have leaks. If you've got a continuous run of hose, you've eliminated the possibility of a leak there, right? Your propane locker, dedicated, it's a dedicated locker is the term for it. Dedicated means nothing else in there. Nothing else in there but just your propane system stuff, your tanks. You don't want to have, all this stuff here. It's not a general storage locker. All this stuff could shift around, damage the system, cause leaks and stuff, right? And it definitely is not a good place to store your flares, right? So none of these are staged, by the way, right? This is stuff I see every day, right? That's why I'm a pessimist. So you always, a dedicated locker, nothing else in there. I will say for your propane system, it's going to have a vent or a drain that drains overboard. Do yourself a favor. Look at the hose and see how old it is if it's deteriorated. You might look like that other hose. Take a bucket of water and dump it in there once a year and see if it drains overboard. Then you're good to go. Engines and generators. Verify. How are we doing for time? Okay. Okay, all right. Okay. 15 minutes, okay. I got how much? 50, okay. So if I finish this and answer all your questions, I have another we'll do a partial slideshow that I have. It's called Captain Frank Sea Chest of Horrors. Just when you were depressed enough looking at these things, we're going to take you to the next level if we've got time. All right. So check all your hoses, fuel, cooling, exhaust for physical damage, leaks that are each double clamped where possible. Inspect your fuel lines, including fill and vent hoses. This is something I see a lot when I survey boats, is they'll have the, the fuel tank fitting, the hoses for them, be 20 years old. right? I mean, again, we try to replace them about every 10 years, but I've seen some 20, 30 years old, right? I had a guy inspect it, and we, I try not to surprise anybody, right? We talk about, okay, this, and this is, this is why I'm going to make this recommendation, right? And when I go on a boat and survey it, I'm not, I don't give any thou shouts or, I have the authority of a wet paper sack, and I like it that way. When I go on there and say, hey, you know what, if I say, a recommendation, I'm just a guy. I'm just a dude that comes on there and says, hey, you know what, if I didn't want to sink or blow myself up, I would probably do this and this based on industry standards, common sense and good marine practice. That's how we roll. I mean, I don't come on there and say, hey, buddy, you're going to do that right now. You do it or you don't. I just tell you the way it should be, and then you go from there. So fuel tank hoses and stuff, I find a lot of them that are original on boats that are 20, 30 years old and past their service life. I had a guy give me pushback on it, right? Because I told him, I said, okay, this hose is 35 years old, and I can poke my finger through it. And he's like, well, I only use that hose once a year when I fill. I said, okay, right? It's a 30-year-old piece of hose or 40 years, whatever it is. So anyway, again, I just tell you where it should be, and then you take it or leave it. Inspect your fuel lines, including your fill and vent hoses, other hoses for softness, brittleness, cracking. Hoses should be soft but not spongy. Check all joints for leaks and make sure hoses are well supported with clips or straps or smooth hoses. And I'll have people, and again, that's a 40-year-old piece of hose. There's nothing wrong with that hose. It's hard as a rock. Well, yeah, it's hard as a rock because it's 40 years old. I wouldn't even drive across country in a car that had a radiator hose, that was 40 years old. And this is what you're relying on to keep your boat from sinking, right? So, inspect your fuel tank, fill and vent hoses, for issues, particularly their age. Check fuel filters, water separators, drain and replace as required. Thoroughly check the exhaust systems for damage or signs of leaking, runner rust, salt deposit, etc. Your exhaust system's critical because if you have a leak in your exhaust system, potential for carbon monoxide entering into the vessel, right? Manifolds and exhaust risers are consumable items. They should be removed and inspected by the manufacturer. Recommendations typically 3 to 5 years. For saltwater, replace them. Okay, so for boats, that have manifolds and exhaust system have manifolds and risers. This is particularly true for boats that are raw water cooled, right? Some of your inboards and stern drives will be a raw water cooled vessel. Sorry, I had to, I sound kind of wimpy this morning. I don't know why. I normally work in silence by myself. That's the way surveyors are, right? So all this public speaking, it's getting to me. So manifolds and risers, they're consumable items. They're not permanent parts of your engine. If you have manifolds and risers, again, depending on whether it's raw water cooled, fresh water cooled, whatever, you have different systems in there. But generally, particularly for your risers, you want to pull them and inspect them every 5 years. Every 3 years or so in salt water. And why is that? Because if the manifolds and stuff, the risers, if they start corroding on the inside, they can let water back into the engine. And that's when big bill comes. And it's catastrophic failure, right? In the real world, on the manual, they say pull them and then pressure test them and inspect them, right? Well, the real money is getting them on and off. You would just go ahead and replace them. That's the best thing to do, right? Even if you test them, now you've still got a 5-year-old manifold stuff that's protecting your engine. The best way to do it is just replace them because again, the big money is getting them on and off. And again, failure here can easily cause catastrophic engine failure. Check your belts for damage and proper tightness. Inspect your entire fuel system, tanks, fuel, pumps, filters for leaks, and replace all filters at least annually or as it's either going to be based on time operated or annual at a minimum. Ensure your bilge blowers are operating properly and inspect your bilge blower hose, the ducting from your bilge blowers. This is especially true for gasoline powered vessels, right? I see some of and I don't know if I got a picture in there or not, some of the duct work for the blower, the intakes and stuff looks like a slinky. I mean, there's no rubber at all. It's just hose or wire running around because it's all deteriorated. You want to make sure that you have your intakes for your blowers and stuff properly mounted and located For the intake for your discharge blower, it needs to be down in the lower one-third portion of your engine compartment above the normal accumulation of bilge water. So 1/3, that puts it in all cases going to be below the carburetor and stuff. You have an entry or a ducting that also provides fresh water into your engine compartment. And that just needs to be, it can be anywhere in the compartment as long as it's above the normal accumulation of bilge water. Okay. Pull and inspect your raw water pump impellers. My deal with that's cheap insurance. If you pull them and inspect them, just replace them when you go back in the water, right? I mean, it's simple insurance. Well, like 15, 20 bucks. If you have impellers that look good, then just keep them for spares. Clean and inspect vented loop, your anti-siphon valve, and your, particularly in like your exhaust hose, you have an anti-siphon valve or loop. And inspect your engine and generator mounts. I did an article for Boat US Magazine about a year ago on how to inspect your engine mounts. It's a pretty good article. It's in there too. You can look it up, or if you need it, let me know. Check all your wiring for damage, install chafe protection as required, check for rust or corrosion, prep, prime, and paint. Clean the engine or genset compartment, verify proper operation of all alarms, gauges, and indicators. Probably the number one cause of engine failure, and it's an ancillary failure, but it results in the failure of your engine, is going to be your alarms and stuff failing, right? In other words, you may have an alarm system on your boat, and a lot of times you'll have a buzzer that may monitor, the system monitors, let's say your engine temp, and it does your voltage output, engine temp, oil pressure, right? You may have multiple systems, and they all have different sensors. And then they go to that one circuit with the alarm. If you have one of those sensors fail, let's say your oil pressure fails, right? It'll still buzz and stuff typically on most of the units. It'll buzz and you think everything's okay, but it's not. That's why you check them all to make sure, particularly on your older installations, right? You don't want to think that something's wrong by the time you smell stuff burning, right? By then it's probably too late. Carry a toolbox, adequate spare parts, fuel filters, belts, spark plugs, impellers, all that stuff. And most engine manuals provide a list of recommended spares. If you're going to go cruising or whatever, if you're trying to build up a spare parts list, start with the manufacturer, the engine manufacturer, generator manufacturer. They have a list of recommended spares. Then you kind of build off of that. So this is not good. Antifreeze. If you see that right there, what happens is, antifreeze is a mix, right? A mix of water, a mix of, whatever type of antifreeze you're using, glycol, whatever. If you just dump antifreeze in there, right, you're going to upset the mix, upset the balance, right? You want to check it, but if you see it's a little low, right, and you're going to add some more to it, you got to make sure the ratio is still going to be the same. If you just keep dumping antifreeze in there without mix or anything, it eventually, the gel, the silica comes out of suspension. That's what that's called right there. It's gelled. The antifreeze is gelled, right? When you have that right there, now you've got to flush the whole system out and stuff and redo it, right? So you always want to make sure when you add, it's at the proper ratio. And I'll tell you something else too. If you go on your boat, and I find this a couple of times in the last year, and the reservoir is low or empty, right? First thought of everybody, the broker particularly, hey, I'm going to just fill this thing up, it'd be good, right? Well, that stuff doesn't evaporate. Where did it go, right? The first thing you think about shouldn't be, well, I got a little bit low, I need to add some. It should be, where did that stuff go? Have I got a leak somewhere or whatever? And then you investigate, and then you go from there. There's your risers, manifolds. In other words, your manifolds here, bolt onto your engine, your exhaust risers are up here. Very corrosive environment in here. You have the hot water meeting in there from the engine, and you've also got the exhaust gases. They all meet in here, right? And the reason you inject the water into the exhaust gas is so that you can pump it out the hose without it burning your exhaust hose, right? So this is a very corrosive environment, and this is bad when you see stuff like that, right? If that fails on the inside, if it looks this bad on the outside, I can guarantee it's 100 times worse on the inside. Shaft log hoses, another thing. If you have your shaft log hoses, what connects your boat to your gland, whether it's a stuffing box, dripless or whatever, this hose right here. A lot of times it'll be, I see boats and it's, again, 20, 30 year old. That's a 20-year-old piece of hose, 30-year-old piece of hose. That's what's keeping your boat afloat. So it should be replaced on a regular basis as well. So you got to be a little bit of a detective when you're looking at your engines and stuff, right? Or when you're looking at your boat in general. So you see there's a rusty mount, right? You say, well, okay, I got a rusty mount. I need to fix that. I need to prime it, paint it. Stuff. First, you should think about, why is it rusty? In this case, the reason it's rusty because you got a raw water pump up there just leaking on it, right? You've got one mount that's rusty. Why is it rusty? And that's, you have to go from there. Bad, when your reduction gear overheats to the point where it's, boiling the paint off, that's probably a bad thing. You're also looking for, stuff coming loose. This is on a, pump here that the bolt's backed out on it, right? Simple thing. I went there and saw it, and it was rattling back and forth, right? So that would be the kind of things you look for. You look at everything. Electrical systems, okay? So I'll start off by saying that picture right there is pretty gruesome looking at it. No other system has the potential, from an AC power and fire perspective to generate failure that your shore power connections do. And we'll talk about a little more about that in a moment. So your batteries, check your insulation, clean your terminals, use terminal grease or petroleum jelly to prevent corrosion. Batteries should be installed in liquid-tight, acid-proof boxes or trays. Be properly secured, movement no greater than 1 inch in any direction, right? Your batteries need to be secured so there's no more movement than 1 inch in any direction. As far as the corrosive, or the trays and stuff, the reason these are particularly for wet cell batteries, they need to be in a box or a tray. And the tray doesn't have to hold all the electrolyte of the battery. It just has to be enough that spill over or boil over. It contains that. And have all exposed positive terminals covered to prevent accidental shorting. All of your positive terminals on your battery should be covered with something, rubber boots. If you have a battery box, the battery box lid serves as the protector for those terminals. Why is that? Because they don't want you to drop a wrench or something over it and short it out, right? Accidental shorting. Check your electrolyte levels where applicable and top off each cell with distilled water. Verify your batteries accept and hold a charge. I'll say one thing about charging batteries, and let's talk a little bit about, just briefly, mixing battery types. A lot of people now, they'll have a mix of, you may have a wet cell start battery for this, you may have a AGM or for deep cycle for your house bank, or you may have NiCads or whatever, right? All of these batteries have different ideal charge voltages. So you have to have a charger, a smart charger that is smart enough to supply the correct ideal charge voltage for each of those batteries. If you have all of them mixed and you got one charger, then somebody's suffering. Somebody's not going to last as long as it would, okay, if you mix the battery types, okay? Even worse is to have a bank of batteries, like your house bank, and you have different types of batteries in that, even worse. Check operation of all interior and deck lighting. Check your electrical shore power, tie plugs, and sockets for charring, melted plastic, etc. Replace at the first sign of damage, okay? So this is the kind of stuff you're looking for every time you go to your boat, right? See, this is chafed in the boat, banged up against it, and it's damaged the shore power cord and caused problems there. So, inlets and plugs. Again, this is probably the #1 cause of AC power related fires on board your boat. Every time you unplug your shore power, whether it's just going out for a day or whatever, first of all, make sure you turn it off. You do it properly, right? You turn off at the breaker at the shore pedestal, or you turn off your breakers in the boat, turn it off at the pedestal, make sure there's no power on it, and then you unplug it and look at it. Look at the plug, look at that, and then you go on about your business. But you should check that, regularly. And what will happen is initially you may see a little bit of browning around the pins here. If you look and see, it looks like a little browning around there. If it's that bad that you can see it here, it's going to be worse on the backside. So this is the kind of stuff you look at. Also, you should have a retaining ring. You got a retaining ring on your plug when you put it in. the inlet, you tighten that retaining ring. The purpose of that retaining ring is to prevent the plug from wiggling around. You get arcs and sparks every time that plug jumps around, micro arcs and sparks, and it kind of snowballs. That generates resistance, and then that in turn kind of snowballs to what you got here. And for God's sake, if you see a bad plug and you replace that, make sure you check the other end too, right? Because I've seen a lot of people, they replace that, and then a week later, this thing's burning again. I don't understand. Well, look at your plug, right? I mean,
How do you think that happened?
it's very easy. The guy, you leave it there. I say the guy, it could be gal too. You leave it there and you don't disconnect it and check it, regularly. Or, you drop maybe you drop the power cord in the water, put it back up, you don't clean it properly, you put it in. Anytime if you get corrosion or you have wiggling when you have power to your boat, those are arcs and sparks, micro arcs and sparks that will generate, pitting on the blades of the pins and stuff, and can cause eventually cause resistance buildup and stuff too, right? That, keeping them clean and checking them regularly. Another thing, boats that have a lot of power draw, liveaboards are really bad. I've lived aboard for years and years. They're bad about that. You have the guy, the liveaboard's using a water heater. Remember, it's not a hot water heater, because if the water was hot, it wouldn't need to be heated, right? So you got a water heater, you got air conditioning, they're drawing all that stuff. In the winter, they have a heater, it draws a lot of amperage. All that stuff going through these pins. If they're not clean, or if they're corroded, or if they're pitted, that's what generates the resistance and heat buildup. Okay, you have smart plugs. Some of the guys, you see the smart plugs, the big orange ones. They're good. These things were designed in the 20s and 30s. This type of bayonet style plug, right? They've been around for decades, or 100 years almost. So this is an old style. You can see the surface area of them is not very big, right? Those smart plugs have a large, wide plug, a lot bigger surface area and stuff. So they spread it out quite a bit better as far as your load coming in. I did an article or comparison on them for Practical Sailor years and years ago. The only thing I didn't like about them was those smart plugs have, and I don't know if they've changed it since then, but they have a thermocoupler in there. If it overheats, it cuts off the plug, which is great. But then when it cools back down, it cuts it back on, right? I said, well, if you had something bad like that happen, why would you want to keep cycling it back on? And I'd call the engineers and stuff to them, and they said, well, we got a lot of people up in the Northwest, they don't like to drive 2 hours to get to their boats. Okay, but if it's tripping, it's heating and tripping, why would you want it to shut back on again? Nobody's there, right? So let's see what other horrors we got here. Terminal maintenance on your batteries, probably due right there. Again, for your batteries, the kind of things you look for: one, they should be secured. No more movement 1 inch in any direction. They should be in a box or a tray, particularly these wet cell batteries. Wing nuts. You shouldn't use wing nuts. They're hard to torque. They always work loose. What you would want to use instead of wing nuts would be like stainless steel nylon nuts. A whole lot better. You don't have to worry about them torquing or whatever. It's probably not the proper term, but loosening. And of course, positive terminals covered. Right? Freshwater systems. That's the only picture I could find of a gnarly freshwater system. If boat owners were forced to drink only water on their boat freshwater system, the hoses probably wouldn't be as gnarly looking as that right there, right? But a lot of people, they don't maintain their system. Oh, you can't drink that water, it's nasty or whatever. If you maintain it, you can drink it just fine. And you don't have to carry 3 or 4 cases of bottled water out there. If you have winterized your system, rinse out the antifreeze, clean and fill your tanks, and add water conditioner or whatever you typically add. Check your system for leaks, verify the water heater operation, inspect your engine heated units for deteriorated hoses and leaks. In other words, if you have a heat exchanger on your engine, that's part of your engine cooling system. It just pumps antifreeze through your water tank and back to the engine. So you need to look at that as part of your engine cooling system. So you check those hoses as well. Ensure that each are double clamped where possible. Sanitation systems. That covers it all right there, doesn't it? Nice cushion place for your toilet paper. I mean, what a bag, what else do you need, right? Inspect your piping and holding tanks for leaks. I did tons of articles on this stuff and also videos on my YouTube channel about how to shock your holding tank, how to clean your holding tank, all that kind of stuff. If you go on my, not plugging it, but if you go on my YouTube channel, there's plenty of articles on this stuff. And if you don't see what you want, let me know, and I'll shoot you an article or email or whatever and answer whatever questions you have. Detach the hose, discharge hose, and inspect for calcified deposits, clean and replace as possible. In other words, your hoses eventually are gonna either, due to age, they're gonna either clog up or they're gonna permeate. What you gotta remember with your sanitation system, if you're in your house, when you flush the toilet, everything gets whisked away, right? In your boat, you got a section of hose that the fecal matter and urine in there is going to be like 100 times stronger because it's not diluted as much as it is when you when you have your house, you flush and stuff. So what you should ideally do is, you want to flush it all the way through, 4, 5, 6 pumps or whatever, make sure it clears the hose and into the holding tank. You can also do that at the end of the day so you don't have to continually flush all that water into your holding tank. Wait till the end of the day and you're back at the dock, give it one good flush of, 5 or 6, 7 strokes or whatever, and that way it clears the line out and stuff. Check your hoses for odor permeation. If you have smells in your I just did an article on that too, or a video. If you have smells in your boat, hit from your holding tank or your toilet or whatever, your head smells bad. It's probably going to either be the first thing you check is going to be connections of your hoses, see if there's any leaks and stuff. And if it's old hose, then you're going to check the hose itself. It could be permeated because the sanitation is of such a strength that it permeates the walls of the hose. And the easy way to tell if it's your hose is take a warm wet rag, wipe it down the hose, put it in a Ziploc bag, take it up on deck, and then you smell. And you'll be able to smell if it's permeated the hose. Why do you do all that? Put it in a bag and stuff, because if you're in the head compartment, you may not be as sensitive to it because you're already, bombarded by it, right? And you replace it. Used to be, it was such a pain to replace sanitation hose because it was stiff as a 2x4. Bad, you had to heat it and put it in boiling water to try to make the bends and stuff. Now the stuff is so flexible, it's a whole lot easier. Check that vent loops are properly installed, clean and inspect. Below is a typical head. Typically, depending on the boat, if you've got a head that's below the waterline, like in a sailboat and stuff, you're going to have 2 vented loops, one between the pump and the bowl, and then one, between the toilet and the holding tank. Just prevents flooding, right? If you wonder if your head will flood, all you got to do is, this is only going to be if your head's below the waterline, your toilet is below the waterline. Lift it up and let it set, and put the lever up and see if water back siphons in there. No matter how much duct tape you put on it, it's not going to fix it. I love duct tape as good as anybody else, but if you've got a bad hose, wrapping it in the duct tape is not going to solve the problem. Another funny story. So this is a vacuum system flush, on a larger trawler. It's part of the vacuum system for the head. It's like a Sealand vacuum flush or whatever, right? So this is the vacuum tank, and it looks okay. Everything looks pretty good. He's got it nice and secured. He's got the screws, bolts, the screws through it. Everything's good. The problem is that's the hull. So when we hauled the boat, there was like 3 inches of screws sticking out of the hull, right? So whatever you drill and put screws in, make sure it's not the hull, right? Safety. How cheap have you got to be? In case of emergency, rip the zipper. It's stuck, right? Is this what I want to have to worry about if I got abandoned ship or I'm trying to hand out life jackets, right? Just rip it open, right? If you can, right? Check your flares, replace those damaged or past their expiration date. Inspect your flare guns for proper operation. Some of the older flare guns, they had a big recall back probably 15, 20 years ago. The guns wouldn't open all the way because the material they used, it swelled with age, and they couldn't open the guns. So if you have one of those, always check and see if it opens, and you get a free refund from those. I think that the names have changed over the years, but yes, sir.
I've heard the Coast Guard's going away from fire flares, and they're saying use like LED devices? Is that?
The Coast Guard is not going away from them. They're giving options for people to use those. What you're talking about, and this is get up on my soapbox here. And in fact, it's funny you should mention that, because I just got an email. I'm going to give you a little short scenario. I got an email from one of the manufacturers, the big manufacturers, and said, you don't need your flares no more. You can use our electronic flare, right? You can use our electronic flare, and you don't have to carry those, this and that. I forget who it was. It was a big company. I could probably pull up the email. And I sent them an email back, and I said, you know what? This is misleading. These things they're not electronic flares. They're electric SOS distress lights. These things are nothing new. They've been around since the 40s and 50s. But what happened is the manufacturers have seized on the fact that, okay, you know what? These electronic distress lights, the ones that, they blink SOS, whatever. If you have that for nighttime use and you have the daytime distress flag, you got to have both of them, right? One for nighttime, one for daytime. If you have both of these, then you don't have to carry pyrotechnical flares to meet the Coast Guard carriage requirements. So they've kind of seized on that and said, okay, you can use these, our electronic flares. And I told them, I said, hey, you know what? What you're selling is not an electronic flare. It's an electronic SOS distress light. So then, I could hear, when I sent that email, I could just see it. They're like, this guy's calling us. It's not an electronic flare, So I got an email back from this guy and says, well, it's because they're right in the email, electronic flare, and then about 3 lines later, electronic distress light, right? Two separate things. And I said, hey, there are no Coast Guard approved electronic flares out there, okay? They're the electronic distress lights. Again, they've seized on the fact that if you have these two, you don't have to carry pyrotechnics. And we had a whole discussion back and forth. And he said, yeah, okay, so anyway, kind of blew me off after the end of it. But the thing is, there are electronic flares out there that work really well. ODO is one of them. I did a comparison with them for Practical Sailor, again, probably 20 years ago. And that thing, let's look at it from a safety perspective. You are meeting the minimum requirements. If you have that distress light, electric distress light, and a day flag. If you're out on the water at night and the feces hits the rotary oscillator, and you want somebody to know, hey, you know what, I'm in trouble, you're going to turn this thing on, and you're going to stand there like Statue of Liberty, or you're going to put it up in your rigging, and there's a white flashing light, Now they do allow them to do, this was a big thing too, now you can do different colored, multiple colored, like I forget what the colors are, green and white or green or whatever. But that white flashing light, right? This is what you're going to rely on the average Joe out there to say, hey, wait a second, is that a SOS? Oh, no, that's OSO. Oh, it's just a white flashing light, right? It's probably the wimpiest distress signal you can have on board. If I have a problem, I want somebody, when I turn this thing on, it looks like, fireworks, 4th of July. I want somebody to know, hey, I'm in trouble. And these ODO flares, I'm not plugging their product by any means, but I'm just saying, when you turn that thing on, it's a red flashing light. There's something going on. Hey, there's something going on over there. There's no doubt. I'm not a big fan of these things. They meet the legal requirements. And if all you want to do is meet the minimum requirements, then that's fine. When I was actively cruising, what I would do is I had these things, but I also had a couple of the non-Coast Guard approved flares, the electronic flares, right? Because those things work like the bomb. And as long as you meet the minimum, it doesn't matter what else you carry, right? The goal is to get help and whatever you carry. So anyway, I'm off my soapbox now. Inspect your fire extinguishers. Verify appropriate number on board and have them serviced as required. I typically, when I do a survey, I would inspect them annually. That's what I typically say. You should, and you as the owner should probably inspect them every quarter. You take them and check the pressure, make sure there's no corrosion on them and stuff like that. Check that all your sound producing devices, your horn, bell, etc., is operational, easily accessible. Inspect your EPIRB or PLB, battery expiration dates, self-test, properly registered with NOAA. Those are the big things that I always look for. Make sure the batteries, if you have PLBs, personal locator beacons, or if you have EPIRBs, you check the battery expiration dates to see if it needs to be serviced. And you're required to have them registered with NOAA. You'll get a sticker every year from NOAA, right? Why do they require you to register from NOAA? Register it with NOAA is because when you register it, you provide information to them, point of contact. If this thing goes off, they can call this point of contact and see, okay, are you really in trouble? Are you really out on the boat, or somebody bumped it or whatever? And it also provides amplifying information on your boat, rather than this thing just going off. Now I know I got to look for a 40-foot trawler, green with blue tarp, whatever, right? It provides all that information for them to help. Part of my Coast Guard career, I was the program manager for a program called SAROP, Search and Rescue Optimal Planning System. It's the computer program that the search and rescue guys use to plot out where the probable search area is for this guy. And it incorporates all the factors, like wind, weather, all that stuff, current, drift, all that stuff. And it tells them where the most likely chance of success is to start their patterns and what type of pattern. So anyway, the goal of being rescued with these EPIRBs and PLBs, the golden day, 24 hours, right? The first 24 hours, that's the best time to find somebody, right? Best chance of success. So the more information that the search and rescue organization has, the better for you. There's pros and cons for EPIRBs and PLBs. EPIRBs are the big ones, right? PLBs are the personal ones. The EPIRBs, the larger units, are registered to the vessel. The PLBs are registered to the person. So if you have a PLB and you go on another boat for a day, you can take the PLB with you, right? So, yeah, as far as function, they all operate the same, except the EPIRBs are bigger and have a longer battery life. I think it's 48 hours. PLBs typically, I think, about 24 hours. So, anyway. Check the compass condition, verify operation, ensure that the compass light works, and you should have a deviation card, too, for the compass. Check to ensure all harnesses, jack lines, and tethers are in good working order. Check all MOB, man overboard gear is in good condition and ready for easy deployment. Check your life raft. Again, the things you want to check on your life raft. Inspection date's a big thing, right? Is it due for inspection? Ensure your vessel has reboarding ladder or other devices that will allow persons in the water to reboard on assistance. Ideally, you want a method if somebody's in the water, they can pull a ladder down or something, or there's steps on your hull to get them where they can get out of the water. The rung of your ladder should extend at least 12 inches below the water line with the vessel in a static position. Man, I don't know what's going on with my voice today. Me. Check condition of all your personal flotation devices, your PFDs, and ensure adequate sizes and numbers are on board and easily accessible. Your inflatable PFDs should be inflated orally at least once a year to ensure that the vests have full integrity and no leaks. There's a video on my YouTube channel about how to test and inspect that. Replace your CO2 cartridges as per the manufacturer's instructions. Verify navigation lights operate properly. Have spare bulbs on board. I will say one thing that I see sometimes, if you have an old style incandescent fixture for your navigation light and you go and you buy an LED light to stick it in there, right? That's not the way you should do it. You shouldn't do that. For the reason being, the light fixture, your navigation light fixture, is tested as a unit, both the bulb and the fixture. When you take that bulb out and you put a LED in there, now you've upset the equation. So it's not, they don't know how it's going to work. You don't really know how well it's going to work if you're going to get the visual, the distance and stuff. Inventory your first aid kit, replenish as necessary, check operation of your smoke and carbon monoxide detectors. All vessels with enclosed sleeping accommodations and a galley should have both smoke detectors and CO detectors installed, typically in your galley or main cabin area and each sleeping area. I like to put a smoke detector in the engine compartment. And even better if they're all wirelessly connected. If one goes off, they all go off, right? Okay, flares. Here's the problem here. This is a Solus gun. I think it's 25 millimeters. This is a 12 gauge flare. They're not going to fit, right? But this guy, when he bought this boat, he said, "Man, I got this thing. I can kill a moose with this." Well, yeah, but you don't have the flares for it, right? Check your spares, your flares to see if they're split and cracked. This is why you check your fire extinguishers, right? Dirt daubers in there, things of this nature. Carbon monoxide detectors. I see this a lot. it's cut. Either the wire's cut or you just take the batteries out. And I asked the guy, okay, well, that thing's defective. It keeps going off. Well, yeah. Or maybe it's detecting CO2, right? Or carbon monoxide, right? So that's the logic you have behind all this stuff. Fire bucket, simple, easy, great insurance. You got a bucket with a lanyard on it long enough to reach the water. Good for a fire. You could use it, as we've seen earlier, you could use it for an emergency toilet if you had to. It's all good stuff. I think this is about the last thing over trailers, for the trailer boaters, right? Check your tires, including the spare for cracks, poor tread, dry rot, proper air pressure, and the like, right? The big thing with trailer tires, dry rot, which I'll show you a picture of in a minute, because they don't get used as much and they have UV damage. Check your wheel bearings for smooth operation, repack as necessary, confirm operation of your brake and running lights, check your rollers, pads, clean and lubricate your winch and jack, and inspect your tires and check for proper pressure. Inspect your trailer frame for rust, sand, prime and paint is required. Pay particular attention to the axles, because on a lot of trailer boats, the axles may flood with water and then drain after you launch and relaunch, right? Corrosion. Internally, if your drain holes get clogged. Check your brakes, check your hitch and safety chains and tongue lock, and ensure your trailer tags and registration is current. This would be something you want to look for, corrosion on your axles and stuff, right? Your brace right here, you see this, actually, see this is what it is, right? That's what's holding your boat there, right? Dry rot on your tires. A lot of times the trailer tire, the trailers sit out there in the sun all day, don't move, for months and months and years, and this is what happens. This is what's keeping your boat on your trailer, right? This piece of ratty line, right? This thing, we don't even have a bow. All right, just put that line on there, we're good. Yeah, we're good. Okay, so that's the end of this presentation. If I've got a little more time, well, maybe you want them to take a break? 15 minutes. Okay, are you guys good to go? You want to keep going through this, burn through this last little bit here? So, all right. So the next thing we'll talk about, there's my contact info if you need it. It's also on my website, is www.captainfklanier.com. YouTube channel, Everything Boats with Captain Frank. If you get lost, just Google Captain Frank Lanier Marine Surveyor. As you scroll through the pictures of me with Russian supermodels, eventually you'll get to my website, and there we go. You're going to have to show me where you put that other one. Yeah, because I would rather you do it, because you know where it is, right?
On the,
It's on the thumb drive. Yeah, it's the second one there. So you'll close that one, and it'll be on the other one. Sea chest drawers.
That's the one you want to open now?
Mm-hmm. May have to close that one. I don't know. Technical difficulties. Please stand by.
We got it. There you go. Boom. Now we'll go. I'll choose your presenter view here real quick.
Okay. So just to burn up this remaining time, first of all, I asked, has anybody got any questions on what we've talked about before? Yes, sir.
Talk about anodes, magnesium versus aluminum.
It depends on where the boat's located at, as far as fresh water versus brackish versus whatever.
They're probably here, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you get a compass deviation card?
You make it.
And what the heck is it?
Well, let me talk about what I would do is for the area where you're at right now, the best place to do is ask the Marina what they use, what they do, right? But again, you have varying types. Some of them last longer than others, and some of them are, the different materials. Some work better in freshwater versus brackish versus saltwater. And some, you can't just arbitrarily mix all of them, because in some cases, if you use magnesium, it may develop a film over and not provide any protection.
So
Think about
Sorry, I was just going to say the paint crew, Armando and Matt Rowland here at Herrington North, recommend aluminum. They switched to that about 8 years ago, and they've been recommending aluminum probably for the last 8 years.
Yep. Yeah. The big thing is about them is you want these things to disappear eventually, right? Because I've had boats when I go in there to go, yeah, my zincs, man, I must have got a good pile of them because they've lasted for 2 years. Well, the reason they last is because they're not working, all right? So, I mean, you want them to eventually waste away. That's what's protecting your boat.
Don't mix them.
And yeah, don't mix them, right? And you were asking a deviation card?
Yeah.
If you go online, you can print out if you pull up a compass deviation card. In other words, if your compass, if it was just sitting out here with nothing around it, then it's going to be true. But if you have things around it, like, boombox, can of pork and beans, whatever around your compass, it's going to cause it to deviate. It's going to pull it. So that's why your deviation card. And to do a deviation card, there's certain steps you have to do, right? You got to do, first of all, the basics, what's around you. And then if you have electrical stuff around you, like you turn it on and see if turn on your windshield wiper affects it or not, right? Or if your engine running or not, right? There's a whole process you go behind. It's detailed, but it's not, it's not rocket science. It's pretty easy to do. But you print off the card and fill it out, and then you go and check it, and then or you can have a compass adjuster perform it as well. Yes, sir. Hang on.
Water heater smell?
Water heater smell.
Yeah, so, or someone said.
Sometimes they'll have anodes in them too that can deteriorate and smell too. Are you having problems with water heater smell?
Last year it smelled like rotten egg.
A lot of times your system, your freshwater system will smell because the water sits in there and is not used a lot. So what I would do is, if you have a problem with smell, first thing you flush the system and put fresh water in it, new water in it to see if, and when you have to drain the whole system out, right? The water heater, everything, or flush it with new water, turn it on at the sinks and let it run and see. And some of it, you can look at the manufacturer will tell you, again, there's a wide variety of water heaters. They may have zincs, may have anodes in them or whatever, right? And they may be required to be replaced as well, or have sediment buildup. It just depends. Yes, sir.
They told us, one of the guys down at Herrington South, where our road is, told us the dock water is well water.
That's another issue
They
too.
said it'll get in there, it'll start smelling like rotten eggs.
Yeah, sulfurs. Again, the water you're taking on board is going to be a big factor of it as well, right?
Captain Frank, I got an online question. Somebody asked if their through holes start turning green, is that an indication of a problem? And if yes, what should be done?
If they turn green,
Yes, if the through holes turn green.
that's okay. So you're talking a bronze through hole or a seacock. That's a verdigris. In and of itself, it doesn't mean that there's a problem with the through hole itself. It just needs to be cleaned. But if that color green is verdigris. If you have bronze, you put it in your garden or whatever, right? It's going to have that nice green thing, patina or whatever they call it, right? So it's just clean it and inspect it is what I would do. But it's not necessarily an indication. You don't associate that green with a lot of, directly with corrosion, right? Okay, anything else? So we're going to just run through these more uplifting photos. Captain Frank Sea Chest of Horrors. This is another part of my YouTube channel that I do. And I started the Sea Chest of Horrors things. I used to do a seminar probably 20 years ago called 7 Sleeping Dogs That Can Ruin Your Boating Day, right? And I did that seminar. And then at the end of it, I started showing photos of bad things I found on boats. And after about 4 or 5 seminars, everybody said, well, you know what? This is okay. Frank, you're all right. You're not too bad on the eyes. You talk pretty good. But, we want to see the Sea Chest of Horrors pictures first. I said, all right. So that's why I started doing the Sea Chest of Horrors things. And we'll start out with that right there. What can go wrong, right? Why waste money on a good tower when you can get a ladder from Home Depot and strap it up there for your half tower, right? Or even better. Oh, wait a second. I didn't put that one in there. Okay. So anyway, problems associated with this, safety, visual deterrence of using the boat, things like that, right? So this is a generator cutoff switch of an old oyster buy boat. And initially you look at it, and these fuses, nice, shiny, that looks all right, that's pretty cool. It's clean, no corrosion. When you look at it closer, you see that's pieces of copper pipe cut into the fuse box, right? So they're not fuses, they're copper pipe, right? Like a penny, right? Except 100 times worse. Trapping rabbits. So this guy his hatch didn't work, the latch, the mechanism fell, it didn't work, his arm. I just sharpened me a stick and put right there, right? What could go wrong? Somebody reaching in there, it's like a marine guillotine, right? Yeah. Shaft log hose. Remember we talked about that earlier, all hose has limited lifespan, This guy's hose was bad, so I'm gonna just wrap it in electrical tape. And that's what he did. He wrapped his hose in electrical tape, right? And as we were doing the CTAR, you could see water bubbling out of it, right? Because the hose is almost gone. Worst thing you can do. Portable gas generator on board. People use them. The Serenian call of clean, cheap power, and death. That's a mixture of all of it, right? Because when there's a whole litany of reasons why you don't want to use a portable gasoline generator on board. One would be carbon monoxide poison. Another would be, trying to fill a tank on a portable generator, a hot generator on a rocking boat, all things of those nature, right? Wiring them in. But this guy here, he had it in the forward cabin of his boat, and that's where he'd run it. I said, man, what are you doing? What do you know carbon monoxide? He said, my mama didn't raise no fool. I know about that carbon monoxide. That's why I shut the door when I use it. And I put the fan on top. What else? What else you need? But this is the kind of stuff you find, right? You go through, people think it's okay until you start getting the body count, right? That anchor rode right there, probably not going to be able to deploy it in a rapid fashion if you needed to, right? Not only is it knotted up, it's wrapped around the spool still, right? Do yourself a favor, unwrap it out and fake it into the anchor locker there, right? So this looks bad, right? Because it is bad. Flooded engine compartment. The problem is this boat's in a parking lot. And what happened is the guy, he parked it. And if you're going to store your boat, one thing, make sure you remove the drain plug. And another thing, check on it. Check on it every once in a while. He left that boat out in a parking lot, in a garage, or on a trailer for about a year. Then he went back and this is what he found.
If anyone's new to Herrington Harbour, on your haul out work order request, you have to select remove drain plug on there. They do not do it automatically.
Yeah. He said, I can't understand it. My bilge pump must have failed, right? That's the other thing I get to when I do a lot of survey inspections for damage. My bilge pump failed and sunk my boat. No, your bilge pump probably didn't fail. Your battery probably died because your pump was pumping too much, trying to fix the hole in your boat or trying to pump the water out of your boat due to a hole or something. This is even worse. So that right there, that's ice, right? So not only did the engine compartment flood, it froze, right? And that's what we have right here. Engine compartment is flooded and froze. So this picture right here shows that the electric engineering firm of Pepe and Lopez and Jack Daniels, you can wire anything you need to, as long as you got these two guys. So what this guy has is he wanted some of that there shore power on board so he could make his coffee in the morning. So he just took a drop cord, run it in, made him an outlet, and that's where he plugged in, right? There's no breakers on there, no nothing. If somebody started, doing the electric boogaloo, they got to run all the way to the dock and unplug it or turn the breakers off, right? We all know fuel in the bilge is not a good thing, right? So what this guy did was he just put a bucket underneath that leaky fuel valve rather than fix it. So now you got a bucket of fuel underneath, and that's the shore power. The wire is the wing nuts he's used for the shore power coming in too, right? Bucket of fuel, shore power connectors. Well, what's the worst thing to happen? Oh, that's this, right? Got him a door up there, protect yourself, right? You thought that the other one was bad. How about this? The walker from the thrift store strapped up there, right? Yeah. The guy said when he started using that, he started yelling a lot of stuff like, hey, you kids get off my lawn and stuff like that. Right? Well, Corn Pop was a bad dude. Navigation lights. Again, they're tested, right? They're tested for functionality and distance to make sure to meet the requirements. These two big Christmas, although, he did have the colors on the right side, but that's probably not, going to meet Coast Guard requirements as far as navigation lights, right? Again, we talked a little bit about, your backup bilge pumps and stuff, Ideally, you want your backup bilge pump not to be confused with an emergency pump, right? But your backup bilge pump, have it elevated a little bit from the primary. That way it's not resting in gunk and crud on your bilge. This is another propane system right there, right? Tied on the back deck, the ratty rope and stuff. What could go wrong? Don't use a camping stove on your boat, right? Particularly when it says right up there, right? Do not use indoors because of carbon monoxide poisoning, right? That's how it was supplied. You got a bottle down underneath the sink, and that thing's just there flying around, when the boat gets underway. Look at that a little bit. Soak it in. Camper on the boat, right? It's right there. That was in Dahlgren. I did a boat up there, Dahlgren, a place called Aqualand. It used to be, right? I don't know if you guys ever heard of that. Yeah, it's not too far from here, right? Aqualand. Been there since the 30s or 40s or something. Yeah. Looked like a place where a lot of people missing teeth enjoyed the water. But, and I'm a redneck as much as anyway, right? But that was a really redneck looking place there. But anyway, this is what I saw there. It's so funny. There's another good one. This one was down in Beaufort, North Carolina, or South Carolina. If you get on the waterway and you went in, Lady Isle, I think is where I saw that. Well, when you do that, of course, when you order a boat superstructure and stuff like that, you've entered into a whole nother equation of its stability-wise and stuff, right? Who knows? This is the kind of stuff you're looking for when you inspect your, plugs and stuff. Burned out holes and stuff would typically be an indication something's going on and it ain't good, right? Remember we was talking about the browning? The browning around your pins, or even that right there, even worse, right? Bad things, indication of bad things going on. Okay, so who can tell me what's wrong with this picture? If you tell me what's wrong with this picture, I'll send you a free copy of my nautical trivia book. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. Mm-hmm. It's in reverse. That's a good guess. Nobody?
Where's the wheel?
There you go. There's no steering wheel. This boat had one helm on it, and we're supposed to do a survey on it, and they used it as a dock condo, and the wife or the man, I can't remember that's taking up too much space. So they just took the wheel off, and it's somewhere ashore, right? You have a wheel. You have a steering wheel. That's the problem. But we didn't want to have that hole there where the wheel was, so we put a frame there and stuff. Yeah. Get with me after. I'll send you a book. No steering wheel. MacGyverisms. This is one of the ways, boat owners unwittingly, essentially try to kill themselves. When they do electrical stuff like this, you got a 30 amp inlet going to a 15 amp, plug so we can get some of the AC power on board, right? I've got so many of these bad things I can't even remember. Here's another one here, right? 30 amp. Here, we just got it wired to the plug, right? We don't even have it, spliced or anything. It's just wired. And then it goes to this doohickey here. And now we've got, we're going out running AC power to our various systems, right? And you didn't even use sail tape, didn't even use electrical tape, right? Let's come on, right? So anyway, this is just, a fire waiting to happen or somebody, a trip to the emergency room, but not a real fast one because they'll probably be shocked to death. Sometimes there is a little bit of misunderstanding on what the Coast Guard requirements are as far as not pumping overboard, right? The requirements are you have a Y, let's say you've got, to your holding tank or from your holding tank, you have a Y valve. The Y valve, you either direct your effluent to the holding tank or you direct it overboard. Or in some cases, maybe you direct it overboard or to the deck pump out, right? If you have most of those Y valves will have a little hole in it where you can put a lock in it or a wire tie. It doesn't have to be anything elaborate. A wire tie will do it. It's just a means of positively controlling which way that valve is going. If you have a through hole with a macerator discharge, got a through hole, you can take a little piece of wood and glue it to your bilge and put a little eye bolt, run a wire tie to the handle. That's all you got to do. I see a lot of people to try to meet these standards or requirements, they'll take the handle off the through hull. Well, why are you doing that? Because now you've disabled the through hull. You don't have to do that. Just secure it with a zip tie, what they call zip ties, right? I'm gonna let you stop me now when I get to the time, all right?
You're 12:05 right now.
Okay, you let me know, or when you guys get bored, I'll stop, all right? This is where they say you learn from other people's mistakes, right? Well, there's got to be other people, right? And this is what we got here. So the person here, he wanted him a diesel heater on board. So he didn't have any tank there. So he made him one out of like a frying oil gallon container, whatever that is, right? That's his diesel tank right there for his heater. It's not secured or anything. Doesn't meet any standard known to man as far as a fuel system installation. There's this pump that goes on up to his diesel heater. Ground tackle, right? You don't want to use these things in any way, these links right here, because they're not as strong as a regular anchor shackle. You definitely don't want to use it for that right there, right? Use a proper anchor shackle. Okay. What's the difference between a regular shackle and an anchor shackle? The anchor shackle has a more bell shape that allows more movement of the anchor and the chain and stuff. Fuses. Yeah, think about fuses. Man, them things always blow when you need them the most. We just put bolts in there. Just like, we'll put bolts in this fuses, man, and you're all set, right? What could go wrong? Fire, maybe. There's a good example of a hose that's past its expected service life, right? When you're looking at your hoses, sometimes you may not be able to see it as good. Take a flashlight and shine it on. If you're in the build, you're down in there. If you take a flashlight and shine on it, you'll be able to see a lot of times if it has the cracks and stuff deteriorated, right? So this guy, he wanted him some heat. It's cold out there. Ain't nothing more miserable than boating when it's cold outside and you ain't got no way to warm up. So he went to Home Depot or Harbor Freight, got him a heater, and wired himself up a wood-burning stove so he'd have some heat. And we know, the stove's gimbaled. I'm going to make this gimbal too, right? So he hung it from chains so it could move back and forth so that it could sear you no matter where you were at in the cabin. If it broke, if it was rocking enough, it could get you no matter where you tried to hide. Or if you was on there, frying chicken or something, all the grease go everywhere,
You made this one up.
I did not. It is not staged. I tell you, it's strange. All the more shocking because they're true. Okay. Halon's, or a guy wanted a system. I'm going to talk just a little bit about fire extinguishers. This guy wanted him a fire extinguisher where he could just squeeze it, because we all know we don't want to open up the engine compartment if there's a fire, because now you generate a rush of oxygen can cause a smoldering situation into a conflagration when you give it that rush of oxygen. So you want a fire port. The fire port is just that little hole or square where you stick a extinguisher in there and you squeeze it off and you put the fire out, right? So that's what he wanted. So he got him that and rigged it up. Now there's things that a lot of people don't understand. This is a dry chem unit, okay? For a dry chem unit to work, you got to see the flame, you aim it at the base of the flame, and you spray it back and forth, right? What you want for your engine compartment or your generator compartment, depending on if it's in an enclosure, you want a clean agent unit, a gaseous clean agent unit. Halon or FE24, whatever the newer stuff is that replaced Halon too. There's a number of them. You want to be able to stick that snout of that extinguisher in there and let it go, and it floods the compartment. That way you don't have to worry about trying to aim this thing. You're not going to be able to aim it because there's a little hole, right? You can't aim it at the fire. You want it to flood the compartment. You want it to be big enough to service the compartment, and you want it to be gaseous, no residue. This stuff here, this dry chem stuff, is extremely corrosive. If you were to spray your engine with that, it would almost, it's like a cartoon. You could almost see it to start eating it as soon as you do it, right? I mean, it's very corrosive. So even if you had a minor fire, if you spray it with these dry chem units, you could have a whole lot more damage than the initial problem because of the corrosion. And it is extremely difficult to get that stuff off of your engine and stuff, or generator. Vice grips. Everybody loves them, right? I love them almost as good as duct tape. The problem here is, so this boat had a bilge manifold system, and it had a gate valve like this, which we could talk about later too. But the handle come off, so he just stuck the vice grips there, and used it to open and close it. There's a couple of problems with this. One, that's damaging the valve, right? I mean, that on the stem there's damage. The other problem is, if anybody on board this is on a commercial fishing vessel, if anybody on board needs a vice grip, man, I know where a pair is right now. They're going to go get that one. And now you can't even shut the valve off or whatever, right? Because somebody took the vice grips. Yeah, that boat sunk about 3 weeks after I surveyed. And I don't know that was part of it, but it certainly didn't help. AC outlets, again, somebody wanting some of that AC power, they just hack a hole in there. Fire, right? Fire in the hole. Remember we was talking about double hose clamps, right? If you're going to install double hose clamps, make sure you got enough hose barb. Here, the hose barb ends here. And so this second hose clamp is just cutting the hose. It's cutting into the hose, right? That's what that is right there. That's why if you don't have enough hose barb, don't install the second one. What do we got here? Oh, squeeze bulbs. These things are not meant to be installed inside a boat with your engine space and all that stuff. A lot of people, if they have an engine or a generator, they'll install these in there so they can prime, the generator and stuff before they start it. The burn time ratio on these things. Fuel hose has a burn time approved by the Coast Guard, it's like 3 minutes or something like that. These things don't meet that required burn time for your fuel system. So they shouldn't be inside within a space with your engine or generator or whatever, right? That burn time requirement. You'll notice you've got a fuel filter on your boat. It may have a metal bowl underneath it. That's called a flame impingement bowl. The reason they have that bowl there is because a lot of times the sight glass will be plastic, right? And that sight glass does not meet the burn time requirements. So they put that bowl under there because they figure if there's going to be a fire, it'll be in the bilge where fuel has leaked and the fire coming up, it protects it. That's why that's there. You launch the boat, everybody's happy, we're getting in the spring, launching, getting ready. You got to make sure this is where they pulled the hose to winterize the engine and they forgot to put the hose clamp back on and tighten it. This kind of stuff I see all the time. Chafe points for your fuel hose. Hey, I'm just going again until we run out of time, right? I'm just dancing, right? Until we run out of time, right? Okay, you let me know when we're stopping. I know they're tired and want to use the bathroom. Grommets and stuff. If you have grommets, chafe protection, right? Fuel hose or your LPG system hose, anytime it has a penetration through the bulkheads and stuff, you should have some form of protection on it to keep it from chafing. They put it on here, but it's popped loose and it's doing no good at all. That hose probably not delivering the output discharge that it's designed to, right? With that 90-degree turn in it, right? You can buy these all day long, right? Stick them in there. This is good. Quick, easy. If you need to take your, your forestay off, man, you just drop that thing off right there. It'll fall like you can't believe. Yeah, it's the kind of stuff I see all the time, right? Well, at least we put some mouse and wire, the stainless steel wire around it to keep it from backing out, right? And thank God we didn't use a blue handle screwdriver instead of a yellow one. Anybody got any anchor roads that look like that right there? Here, the teardrop shackle or the teardrop thimbles are bad on the road for a couple of reasons. I mean, they work as long as you maintain them and install them properly, splice it. But when they get like this, they get loose. They start tilting over when you put them under load. This can start cutting into your rope portion of your road and stuff. The best ones are the thimbles that are forged and they don't have any split in it like that right there. Same thing here, loose. If it's this thing will just pop right out. Mousing, remember we talked about mousing, right? When you mouse this thing, mouse just means secure it with the stainless steel wire. When you do that, you want to go around not the chain, but around the shackle, right? That's what keeps it from unscrewing. When you put it like this around the chain, now it's going to flex and probably break off, right? Every time that they put some pressure on it. Swivels. You were talking about anchor swivels, right? One of you guys. You can put these things on backwards. They have a certain way they're supposed to go, right? If you look at the way this is, see, it's got your jaws right here, right? That should be to the chain. This should be connected to your anchor with an anchor shackle. Because in this position right here, if you're swinging from side to side, it puts it in a bind, right? That's why you've got this, where you put it on a shackle so it has more movement, freedom of movement, right? Quick links, don't do it. These things here are weak. They're not meant to connect your ground tackle in any shape or fashion. That and you have the ones that that pop in, and just don't use any of that stuff. They're not suitable for use for it. That's another one right there. See, don't use these things either. They're not as strong as a regular anchor shackle, right? These. Can you imagine the person trying to troubleshoot something on your boat that's not working, or you? And this is when you open it up, this is what you're looking at, right? Organize your stuff, your wiring and stuff. It makes it easier on everybody. You and the person that's trying to help you, right? And when you don't run your wires, this is run up to a pedestal that caught into the gears, right? This is what happens to your control cables if they're not, installed properly and protected. So, this guy, I always say this guy, right? This guy, he wanted 12 volts, but he didn't want to put a battery on. Those batteries, man, they're expensive and they're heavy. So what he did was he got a battery charger from Harbor Freight or somewhere, and he'd run that to the place where your batteries would be connected to the switch. So the battery charger is providing his 12-volt power to the systems. I said, well, what do you do when you're underway? That's the beauty of it. I run my generator and plug it into that, right? So that's why he has that without, it doesn't have any batteries. He just used the battery charger, right? People think of some strange stuff. Another rat's nest trying to figure out where to install or, how to troubleshoot wiring and stuff. Another one. I could sit here all day and show you pictures of it. Are we about done? 2 minutes, 2-minute warning. We'll talk a little bit about crowded post syndrome, right? Your battery terminal, you shouldn't have more than 4 terminals on it, right? Where it's crowded post. What you should do is if you have that much stuff going to it, you should take off and put a separate little panel. And then you connect all that stuff to that. That's what I used to do with my bilge pumps, have all the bilge pumps on a small little sub panel from the battery, powered directly from the battery. That way you don't have to worry about somebody killing the battery switches and killing your bilge pumps, right? It's on a separate switch, but it gets all these, connections away from your battery post. Same thing here. There's a positive battery, connection right there bouncing around the engine compartment, right? A nut and a bolt and a washer, right? I call that the Jethro installation. You see that right there when you're looking at your boat? What is that? That's on my engine cover. What could be causing that? Well, it could be your exhaust manifold or your exhaust chafing against it. And that's what's causing it to burn through. This is the kind of stuff I see every day, I mean, it's, you try to, when you're looking at the boat, again, if you see good stuff, that's great. But you have to, you're trying to keep people safe and try to, sometimes you save them from themselves, right? Generator installation. Guy didn't need that generator no more. He just took it out. What about the exhaust hose? That thing's like 3 inches above the water line. You just leave it open, right? Easily could flood the boat, right? If it drops down or you get falling seas or whatever, right? Don't halfway, do all of it if you're going to take something out or whatever, right? Gate valves. I'm not a big fan of gate valves, particularly on through-hole fittings. The guts of them are prone to corrosion. You can't look at them like a regular seacock and see 90 degrees, it's open or closed, right? These things shouldn't be on your boat on a through-hole fitting particularly. And the problem here is, not only is it failed because of corrosion, A gate valve, you can't tell if it's open or closed. Even if you close it and it stops, it could have debris inside of it that stops it from fully closing, right? Another problem here with this, got a PVC piece of PVC screwed onto this bronze seacock, right? PVC, composite to metal, different expansion and contraction ratios. This could, crack this PVC because, again, they have different expansion contraction ratios. This is a through hole fitting below the waterline. It took me a while to look at it. I had to sit there a minute. Well, something don't look quite right. There's no hose clamps. There's no hose. This is PVC insulation. The guy just connected it to the through hole using PVC insulation, that black PVC insulation. You see, I mean, it's the kind of stuff I see every day. If you've got a through hole fitting below the waterline, if you've got a section of hose or a section of pipe or something in between the through hole and the seacock, now you've introduced a section of through hole and a section that is not protected by the seacock. If this thing breaks, you still have no way of shutting the water off. That's why you don't want to have this in there. You want the seacock to be on the through hole. Another example, if you're going to take it off and not use it, cap it, right? Plug it off or glass over it. Bad hoses, cockpit hoses, right? This is just, again, you're just looking at, the stuff I do. I mean, a trained ape could do it if he knew the standards, right? You look at it and say, hey, that's deteriorated, it's cracked, it's split. This is the simple kind of stuff that you look for, but yet people look over it. A lot of times somebody has a problem on a boat, they look at it every time they walk by. Man, I need to do that. Man, I need to do that. Eventually, you become numb to it and you just forget it. You don't even do it if you never do it, right? So, where are we at with time? Wrap up. Okay. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this. And again, if you've got any questions on anything, just shoot me an email and let me know what it is, and I'll try to help you out. And if you go on my site, again, if you wanted one of my books or my hats or whatever, 15% discount. Just mention this seminar here, and I'll give it to you, and we'll get it out. The books, heartfelt notes signed directly by me, delivered to you. How can you beat it? So.
All right, guys, don't forget about our sock burning social tonight at 5 o'clock. Bring socks.
Oh, nice. I'm glad you all enjoyed it.
Really learned a lot. I will confess, it scared me. But I guess that's part of it, right? That's part of the
Again,
intent.
it doesn't scare you. Well, these are not